If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Why Was I Buried Underground? Cold. A chill that seeped deep into his bones. So cold it felt like it could freeze the soul. That was the first sensation Takeo Minamoto felt upon waking. It wasn't just the cold, there was also a suffocating pressure, as if he had been buried alive. No. Not as if. Takeo opened his eyes, felt the weight of the soil pressing down on him, and caught the stench filling his nose. He immediately realized he was buried in the ground. There was no time to wonder how he ended up there. He had to get out. If he didn't escape, he would die here. Takeo didn't want to die. His body, driven by a desperate survival instinct, exploded with every ounce of strength he had. Bit by bit, inch by inch, Takeo ignored the pain and the numbing cold in his hands as he clawed his way upward. How long had it been? He didn't know. But finally his hands broke through the frozen soil. He pulled himself out and gasped as he took in the frigid but fresh air. Ha! Lying on his back in the soil that had not yet been completely cleared, Takeo stared up at the dim sky, snowflakes drifting down silently. The cold seeped into his bones, and he gasped for breath in the frigid air. Slowly, his reason and consciousness returned, and he began to wonder why was he here? Takeo Minamoto. Male. 24 years old. A sales trainee at a regular company. That was all he could recall about himself. His parents had passed away, he had no siblings, no home of his own, and at 24, he didn't even have a girlfriend. He was completely alone. The last thing he remembered was standing on the rooftop of his rented apartment. He had been leaning against the railing, sipping wine and reflecting on his life when he suddenly heard a crack. The railing gave way. Then came darkness. The next moment he woke up, he was here. So. I fell? Then was buried alive 'cause the people thought I was dead? Hey? No way, it's modern times, who even buries a young man like me without even checking a pulse anymore? Takeo figured he must have fallen from the rooftop and died, then somehow ended up buried underground. But something didn't add up. First of all, he worked in the south, and it was still summer. Even if he had fallen and was buried, there shouldn't be snow on the ground when he came to. Second. He seemed smaller. Takeo, who had barely crawled out of the earth, looked down at the clothes he was wearing. They resembled a kimono. In his hands, they were small, clearly the hands of a teenager. He turned to look around. An ordinary forest, somewhat desolate, but not without signs of life. In the distance stood a Japanese-style house, weathered with age. And behind him, a row of burial mounds. Takeo could see the raised piles of earth and estimated that at least 5 people were buried there, including himself. Rubbing his shoulders to fend off the cold, Takeo stepped into the dilapidated house for shelter from the snow and wind, all while trying to piece together his current situation. Did I just transmigrate? After sitting inside for a few minutes, Takeo started to form some guesses. If he wasn't mistaken, then he had possibly traveled from modern-day Japan to the past? No, he couldn't say for sure that this was the past. But one thing was certain, he was somewhere that looked very much like historical Japan. And the person he'd transmigrated into had just gone through a tragedy. Judging by the damage to the house and the blood frozen black on the floor, it seemed this family had experienced something horrific, a massacre. Every member of this household had likely died here. The cause of death? Still unknown. Takeo checked himself over. Aside from a few rips in his clothing and some dried blood, his body was miraculously unharmed. Ruling out the possibility that the original owner of this body died of natural causes, Takeo suspected that his transmigration must have caused some sort of anomaly, possibly even healing the body's original injuries. As for the chance that he had become some kind of undead, he dismissed that idea quickly after checking his own body temperature. A corpse wouldn't feel cold. The fact that he could still feel the chill in his bones was proof enough he was alive. Even if I'm not undead, I'll still freeze to death if this keeps up. No, I need to find a way to stay warm first. Shivering, Takeo rubbed his arms and forced himself to get moving. He needed heat. Although the house was in poor condition, the family that had lived here had left behind plenty of firewood and charcoal for winter. Takeo found a decent pile but then hit a major snag. He couldn't start a fire. He had no lighter, no matches, and no tools for fire making nearby. Having grown up in the city, Takeo had no idea how to light a fire from scratch. So even though he had wood and fuel, all he could do was stare at them in frustration. Ugh! I should have paid attention when my roommate watched Man vs. Wild. With no other options, he began rummaging through drawers and storage in the house. He found a few thick pieces of clothing and wrapped them tightly around himself. Then, picking a direction, he prepared to leave. This house was in such bad shape that cold wind blew in from all sides. If he stayed here overnight, he really would freeze to death. To survive, he had to move on. This home was clearly built on a mountainside. If he just followed the path down, he should be able to find other homes or at least a village. After all, a household this large couldn't have lived in total isolation. Someone had to be nearby. Otherwise, even managing day-to-day needs would have been impossible. Takeo believed there had to be other people living on the mountain. And even if there weren't, there had to be someone at the foot of it. No matter what, he needed to find shelter for the night. Freezing to death on the very first day of this new life was not an option. Fortunately, his guess turned out to be right. Not long after he began making his way downhill, Takeo ran into someone. A middle-aged man was walking up the mountain, carrying a bundle of firewood. He noticed Takeo and Takeo noticed him. Kamado Takeo. The man spoke in what sounded like old-style Japanese, but somehow, Takeo understood him clearly. The name registered in his mind instantly, as if it had been automatically translated into modern Japanese. Kamado. That must be this body's family name. Takeo didn't know how to respond. The man clearly knew him, but he had no memory of this person. He didn't even fully know what this body was called until now. Why are you coming down the mountain so late? Where's Tanjiro? The man approached him, concern in his voice, asking questions Takeo had no answers for. The man's expression was serious and solemn, his eyes full of scrutiny as he looked at Takeo, especially around his mouth, as if searching for something. Takeo wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but he had the strange feeling that the man seemed a little afraid of him. Tanjiro, that name sounds familiar. I'm really cold, and kind of hungry. Do you have anything to eat? Takeo didn't know how to address the man, so he relied on his current childlike appearance, put on a pitiful expression, and looked up at him with teary eyes. The middle-aged man looked startled for a moment, but when he saw Takeo's expression, his wary demeanor softened slightly. He walked up to Takeo, placed a warm hand on his head, and said gently, "Did you get into a fight with your family? Never mind. Stay here tonight. I'll take you home in the morning." "Thank you." Hearing that the man was willing to take him in, Takeo immediately felt a wave of relief wash over him. He smiled and thanked him sincerely. Whoever this man was, it didn't matter right now. At least he wouldn't have to freeze or starve to death tonight. That was good enough. As for this body's identity and relationships, he'd figure those out later. For now, his top priority was survival. That thought in mind, Takeo followed the man into the small wooden house. By the way, before transmigrating, Takeo liked watching movies. But anime? Not so much. Chapter 2, My Cheat Ability. Your brother Tanjiro stayed at my place last night. You can use his bedding for now. After entering the wooden house, the middle-aged man took out some bedding and spoke to Takeo. Takeo politely thanked him, then sat with the man by the edge of the stove to warm up, all while sorting through the information he had gathered during dinner. First, Takeo confirmed his current name. He was now Takeo Kamado, the second son of the Kamado family, who lived in the mountains and made a living selling charcoal. Above him were his older brother Tanjiro, and older sister Nezuko, siblings of the body he now inhabited. Their father had passed away the year before last. Since then, Tanjiro had been the one supporting the entire household by selling charcoal, while their mother stayed home to care for the younger children. Altogether, not counting the deceased father, there were 7 members of the Kamado family, including Takeo. His mother was Ki, his siblings were Tanjiro, Nezuko, Shigeru, Hanako, and the youngest brother Rokuta. After learning all of this, Takeo was completely stunned. The actual fuckity-fuck? What kind of superhuman is Ki Kamado? She gave birth to 6 children in an era when childbirth carried such a high risk of death. But when he thought about how the Kamado family might have been completely wiped out except for him, Takeo's mood grew heavy once again. For now, Takeo set aside the question of why the Kamado family had been wiped out. The fact that they had been entirely slaughtered proved one thing: this world was likely extremely dangerous. This might not be the ordinary feudal Japan that Takeo had initially assumed. After all, according to what Grandpa Saburo had said, it didn't seem like the country was currently at war. Right, Grandpa Saburo was the middle-aged man currently taking care of Takeo. He was one of the few people living deep in the mountains and was familiar with the Kamado family. Last night, Tanjiro had returned too late and had stayed at Saburo's house to rest. Now, Saburo had temporarily taken in Takeo as well. To be honest, Takeo was very grateful to him. But when he remembered that Saburo planned to send him home the next day, Takeo began to feel uneasy. If the entire Kamado family, aside from Takeo, had really been wiped out, then once Saburo arrived the next morning and saw the devastated scene, and realized Takeo had come to his house asking for food and shelter without a word of grief, he might think Takeo was possessed by a demon and try to exorcise him on the spot. After all, Takeo's current behavior didn't look like someone whose entire family had just been killed. Wait a minute, wasn't the Kamado family supposed to have 7 members? Why were there only 5 graves? Lost in a tangle of thoughts, Takeo suddenly realized this discrepancy. But before he could think further, he heard Grandpa Saburo say, "Go to bed early. If you stay up too late, demons will come knocking." Demons? Are there, really demons? Takeo was startled by Grandpa Saburo's words and asked in a hurry. Since long ago, demons have appeared after the sun sets, Saburo explained. They feed on humans, attacking them out of hunger. So at night, don't go outside. And don't stay up too late, or a demon might come knocking. He said it in the same calm tone an adult might use to tell a child, if you stay up too late, a monster will come eat you. But judging from the tone of Saburo's voice, Takeo didn't think he was telling a bedtime story meant to scare children into sleeping. So, demons really exist in this world? Well, considering the fact that he had just transmigrated, it wasn't too hard to believe that demons were real too. Though now that he thought about it, was the demon Saburo spoke of the same kind of demon he imagined? Lying in bed, Takeo let his thoughts drift as his mind wandered. It had been an exhausting day. Not only had he just experienced the bizarre events of transmigrating and coming back from the dead, but he had also trekked alone through the mountains for most of the afternoon. Both his physical and mental strength had reached their limit. So, the moment his head hit the pillow, he quickly fell into a deep sleep. Beside him, Saburo, who was making paper umbrellas, glanced over at the now sleeping Takeo. After a moment of thought, he looked at the empty bowls of food Takeo had completely polished off, took a puff from his pipe, and slowly exhaled a long ring of smoke. At last, the lights went out. The night passed without incident. 10. In the darkness, Takeo stood alone atop the surface of a rippling body of water. He looked down at his hands and realized they matched the ones of the body he now inhabited. Even in this dream, he had become Takeo. Where is this? Fully aware that he was dreaming, Takeo lifted his head and looked around. The dim, shadowy space stretched endlessly in all directions. There were no landmarks, no boundaries, nothing existed except the water beneath his feet, smooth and still like a mirror. Takeo began walking across the water, hoping to find something. He had no idea how long he walked before he finally stopped and looked ahead. A figure had appeared in the distance. Someone wearing a leather jacket, leaning against a transparent tree. As Takeo approached, the person came into clearer view, a man with a rugged western face and a full beard. From the looks of him, he didn't seem like someone easy to deal with. When Takeo got close enough to see his face clearly, he couldn't help but blurt out in shock. Holy crap, Logan! That's right, the man sitting before him was none other than Logan, Wolverine from the X-Men series. And not just any version, this was the movie version, played by Hugh Jackman. But, this Wolverine looked a little older. No, a lot older. Older than even Grandpa Saburo. If Takeo hadn't watched the X-Men films so many times and formed such a vivid impression of Wolverine, he probably wouldn't have recognized him at all. Still, that begged the question, why was Wolverine in his dream? Puzzled and curious, Takeo found himself walking toward him, unable to resist. At first, Logan didn't react at all. Only when Takeo came right up to him did he finally lift his head and extend his right hand toward him. Takeo stared at the hand stretched out in front of him, offering a handshake, and pointed at himself in confusion. You want to shake hands? Logan responded with a low hum from his throat, his expression unchanged. Takeo still didn't understand what was going on, but at this point, it didn't seem like he had any other choice. He looked down at the outstretched hand, took a deep breath, and grasped it. Their fingertips touched. Palms met. And in the instant their hands connected, something exploded inside Takeo's mind. Countless fragments of information surged into Takeo's mind through the connection of their palms, complex, chaotic, overwhelming. Within moments, the sheer impact caused his consciousness to fade entirely. Darkness engulfed his vision. His awareness vanished. When he finally came to and opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was the ceiling of Grandpa Saburo's house. The scent of freshly cooked rice drifted through the air, and the sound of someone chopping firewood echoed from outside. Cold morning air seeped into the room, fully rousing Takeo from sleep. With a quick turn, he sat upright on the tatami mat. The fragments in his mind rapidly began to coalesce, coming together into a coherent form, allowing him to finally understand what had happened. So this is probably my cheat ability, hey? As he sifted through the information in his mind, Takeo clenched his right hand into a fist. Sharp bone claws suddenly shot out from between his knuckles, still streaked with traces of blood, making them look somewhat grotesque. But Takeo didn't feel disgusted at all. Because this was his power inherited from old man Logan. This was the cheat ability he had awakened upon transmigrating. Chapter 3: Regeneration. First, Takeo began organizing the information in his mind. Based on the information he received after making contact with Logan, it was clear that he had already transmigrated long ago. It likely happened the moment this body died in this life. Either he arrived in this world then, or his memories from his previous life awakened at that time. However, simply recovering memories from a past life wouldn't have been enough to bring him back from the dead. What truly resurrected Takeo was the regenerative ability inherited from old man Logan. And this was his cheat ability. At regular intervals, within the space of his consciousness, a fictional character familiar to Takeo would be summoned. As long as he earned that character's acknowledgement, Takeo would gain all of their powers and combat skills. Ordinarily, receiving that recognition would require Takeo to engage in a duel with the character and defeat them. But for some reason, Logan hadn't made him go through that. Maybe it was because he pitted Takeo, or perhaps because he had no will to go on himself, but either way, he acknowledged Takeo easily, even allowing him to borrow a portion of his power in advance. The version of Logan that had appeared in his consciousness was the one from the movie Logan, 2017, Old Man Logan. Even so, his regenerative ability was very real. Even if weakened to its limit, it was still strong enough to bring Takeo back from the dead. Later, when Takeo returned to that inner world again, Logan entrusted him with the full extent of his powers. Super regeneration, bone claws, enhanced senses, delayed aging, and all the hand-to-hand combat techniques Logan had mastered over more than 200 years of life. All of these abilities now belonged to Takeo. They were his foundation, his key to surviving and standing his ground in this world. Looks like I didn't get the adamantium skeleton, but that's fine. For old man Logan, adamantium was basically as poisonous as it was powerful. Retracting his bone claws, Takeo muttered to himself. The abilities he had received from Logan were all innate abilities that belonged to Logan's body itself. Things like the adamantium skeleton, which had been implanted later, weren't part of the inheritance. Or more precisely, physical materials couldn't be passed on, only knowledge and abilities could be transferred through the legacy. That's why Takeo's claws were just ordinary bone, not metal. But that was perfectly fine. In fact, it was probably for the best. In his old age, Logan's healing factor had significantly weakened. His passive regeneration was only slightly stronger than a normal human's. For more serious wounds, he had to consciously activate his healing ability in order to recover quickly. What used to be automatic had become manual, and when that happened, the adamantium, which was inherently toxic, became a heavy burden on his body. That same burden would apply to Takeo as well. In other words, if he had inherited the adamantium skeleton, it might have actually killed him faster. It kinda hurts. Takeo winced, glancing at the slowly healing wound between his fingers. The wounds caused by the bone claws piercing through the skin in Logan's prime, they would have healed in the blink of an eye. But now, it would probably take several minutes, maybe even 10 or more, for a full recovery. Still, if Takeo actively used the healing ability, the speed would increase significantly. Looking down at the injury on his hand, and not wanting Grandpa Saburo to notice anything unusual, Takeo closed his eyes and focused, activating his regeneration. A minute later, the wound on his fingertip had completely healed. Aside from a faint trace of blood, there was no sign of injury at all. "Looks like you're awake," Just as Takeo finished healing the wound, Grandpa Saburo pushed the door open and stepped inside. He was carrying an armful of firewood. Without much care, he tossed the logs near the stove and then sat down with his back to Takeo, puffing calmly on his pipe. "Since you're up, come eat. Once we're done, I'll walk you home." "Walk me home?" Hearing that, Takeo suddenly remembered the situation he was in. He silently walked over to Saburo, sat near the stove to warm himself, and after a moment's thought, he said quietly, "Thank you, Grandpa Saburo. But, you still have work to do, right? So how about I head back on my own later?" Decided not to run away from home after all. Grandpa Saburo glanced over at Takeo, still under the impression that Takeo had come down the mountain the night before because he was trying to run away from home. Given the circumstances, Takeo couldn't possibly say that his whole family had been wiped out. So, with no other option, he nodded stiffly. "Yet. I thought about it, and I realized I was in the wrong. So I've decided to go back." "I see. That's good, then." Grandpa Saburo didn't seem suspicious. He exhaled a puff of smoke, then pointed toward the rice steaming nearby. "Go ahead and eat first. You'll need energy to climb back up the mountain." "Okay." After breakfast, Takeo began making his way back up the mountain. He had left in such a rush yesterday that there were still things he hadn't done, and now, he could use today to take care of everything that needed to be handled. With his stomach full, a good night's rest behind him, and having awakened all of Logan's powers, Takeo felt completely refreshed. The path that had taken him half a day to walk yesterday, he now covered in less than a morning. When he returned once more to the Kamado family's home, he saw the soil he had dug through to climb out still left uncovered, as well as the 4 snow-covered graves nearby. He pressed his hands together in silent prayer, then began refilling the dirt over the grave that had once been his own. Whether Takeo Minamoto had become Takeo Kamado, or whether Takeo Kamado had awakened the memories of someone once called Takeo Minamoto, he wasn't quite sure anymore. Philosophical questions like that were no longer something the boy intended to dwell on. Since he had already become the boy named Takeo Kamado, then Takeo would live on under that name and identity. After all, his first name was still the same. As for the world he came from before transmigrating, to be honest, Takeo didn't have much to miss. His parents had passed away long ago, and he had no other family. He didn't even have a single close friend to confide in at most, some old college roommates he had gotten along with decently. With such a simple and detached social life, abandoning it completely didn't feel like much of a loss. In fact, being transmigrated into another world, stirred a bit of excitement in him. After all, when he was working late nights and drowning in overtime, he often fantasized about ending up in a different world. And now, in a way, that wish had come true. Of course, that was largely thanks to his cheat ability. If he hadn't had that, Takeo suspected he'd be more desperate than anyone to return to the modern world. At the very least, modern society was safe. "Sorry. I've taken over your body, but I swear, I'll find a way to avenge you. I'll also find Tanjiro and Nezuko. Please rest easy." After rebuilding the Kamado family's gravestones, Takeo stood in front of them and quietly offered his prayers. No matter what the truth was, whether this body had given him a second life or whether he was Takeo all along, merely having lost his memories, he owed a debt, and it was a debt he intended to repay. And if he really was Takeo, then that debt ran even deeper, and abandoning it was never an option. At the very least, Takeo had to uncover the truth behind the Kamado family's massacre and find the one responsible, so he could avenge them. That was what he ought to do, as Takeo Kamado. From how things look now, Tanjiro and Nezuko, no, I should say big brother and big sister, they're probably still alive. I just don't know where they went. It's a shame I got Logan's enhanced sense of smell a bit too late, otherwise, I might have been able to track their scent. With his bundle packed, Takeo Kamado began thinking about what to do next. Based on what Grandpa Saburo had said, it seemed that Tanjiro, the Kamado family's eldest son, was still alive. And since Nezuko's body wasn't found among the dead, the chances that she had also survived were quite high. In fact, it was even possible that the 4 graves had been dug by them. Though why there were no gravestones remained a mystery. Still, Takeo had already made up for that, so there was no point in worrying further. And if the 2 of them were alive, then there was a good chance they knew who the killer was. That made it even more important for Takeo to find them. Partly so he could reunite with the family of this body and partly so he could identify the killer and eliminate them, to avenge the Kamado family. As he planned out his next steps, Takeo descended the mountain from the other side, muttering to himself with a puzzled expression. Kamado Tanjiro. Kamado Nezuko, why do those names sound so familiar? Wait a second, don't tell me I've transmigrated into some anime series. Fuck. I don't even watch anime. To reiterate, Takeo was a movie buff. Aside from a few childhood shows, he didn't watch anime at all. Chapter 4, An Escort Mission. The morning air at the port carried a strange, bone-deep chill. Workers bustled about, shouting as they loaded cargo onto boats. Amidst the crowd, Takeo's figure stood apart, his small frame clearly that of a boy, made even more noticeable by the katana at his waist. After all, in this era, the Japanese government had issued the Heitrei, Sword Abolishment Edict, which banned civilians from carrying swords. Only government-approved soldiers and police officers were allowed to wear them. Which meant the sword at the boy's waist drew even more attention than usual. But the boy Takeo Kamado didn't care in the slightest about the looks others gave him. He rubbed his shoulders and stared at his hands, red from the cold, white breath puffing out with every exhale. Even with a regeneration ability, he could still feel the cold. At most, it just meant he didn't have to worry about frostbite. Now then, a quick explanation of what Takeo was currently doing. He was working a part-time job. That's right. He was working at the docks of this coastal city loading cargo. Ahem. Before anyone judges him, let Takeo explain. It's not that he didn't want to immediately go searching for Tanjiro and Nezuko, or hunt down the killer who wiped out the Kamado family. The problem was he didn't have any money. And no matter the era, money was always one of the most important things in life. In peaceful times, it was even more essential. You can't take a single step without money. That wasn't just an expression. It was painfully true. After Takeo left the mountain and traveled in a different direction for several days, he quickly ran out of the savings he had found at home. There wasn't much he could do. The Kamado family had never been wealthy, and when Tanjiro had left, he had likely taken what little portable valuables remained. What was left for Takeo was next to nothing. There was a good amount of charcoal, sure, but it wasn't like Takeo could haul that around on his back everywhere he went. So after burning through the last of his coins, he had no choice but to find a way to earn a living. He didn't expect to make much, just enough to keep himself from starving on the road. In the end, Takeo used the combat techniques inherited from Logan to get a job as a bodyguard for a wealthy merchant. Fortunately, old man Logan had mastered quite a few Japanese martial arts, so when Takeo claimed to be a samurai, no one doubted him. Especially after he defeated 3 of the merchant's hired guards at once with nothing but a wooden sword. After that, no one questioned his identity as a swordsman. And just like that, he smoothly became one of the merchant's guards. The merchant even gave him a katana and seemingly acquired an official sword-carrying permit for him through some special channels. Now, Takeo was assigned to help escort the merchant's transport crew. The job wasn't difficult at all. The merchant had already taken care of the necessary arrangements on all fronts, so it was unlikely anyone would try to cause trouble. All Takeo had to do was follow the merchant's caravan by river route to Mito, and his task would be complete. As a side note, it had already been over a month since Takeo had transmigrated into this world. And over the course of that month, Takeo had also come to understand what era he was now living in. Taisho Year 1. Taisho Year 1, that meant the year 1912. Takeo didn't know much about this era, but it was said to be one of the most peaceful periods in Japan's history. And based on what he had seen so far, that didn't seem like an exaggeration. Development was happening across the country, and there were hardly any signs of refugees or widespread suffering. There were still beggars, of course, but far fewer than Takeo would have expected for the time. However, beneath this seemingly peaceful surface, something else seemed to be lurking. Takeo glanced at a few of the other guards stationed nearby. They were chatting quietly among themselves. Their voices were low, but they couldn't escape Takeo's ears. Among the heightened senses Logan had passed down to him, smell was the sharpest. But his hearing and eyesight were also far beyond normal human standards. At this range, even a whisper was perfectly audible to him. "Hey, did you hear? Supposedly there's been demon activity in Nami Town." "Demons? Aren't those just old folk tales?" "I don't know for sure. I only heard it from a relative who came to ask for help. They said a whole family over there was eaten by a demon. They couldn't even find a single intact corpse at the scene. Tisk, brutal stuff," Yikes, that sounds terrifying. The two guards were quietly exchanging gossip rumors of demons spreading through the towns. Legends about demons. This was the third demon-related story Takeo had heard in the past month. The first had come from Grandpa Saburo, the second had been a children's nursery rhyme passed around among the local kids, and now, this was the third. If the first two could still be dismissed as nothing more than folklore passed down through generations, then hearing a third one was enough to make Takeo take it seriously. These rumors about demons were popping up too frequently. And considering how the name Kamado Takeo sounded vaguely familiar, Takeo had a suspicion he might have transmigrated into the world of an anime he had heard from one of the YouTube shorts that a demon-related anime was making billions. Unfortunately, aside from childhood staples like Digimon and Dragon Ball, Takeo hadn't really watched any anime. Ugh. I scrimped and saved, just to buy a massive TV, and for what? I binge-watched Avengers, Inception, Loki, The Wolf of Wall Street, and every goddamn Nolan mindbender out there. And now you're telling me I should have watched anime instead? Yeah, fuck you too, God. He didn't know anything about new or popular series, so he couldn't say for sure whether he had ended up inside an anime or not. Well, I died. At least I got another chance at life with Logan's powers. Yeah, I take back the fuck you comment. Still, for now, assuming that was the case wasn't a bad starting point. And if this was an anime world, then the existence of demons was highly probable. Even if yokai or other supernatural creatures showed up, Takeo wouldn't be surprised. From what he remembered, Japanese anime had plenty of stories involving yokai and the occult. Come to think of it, demons could probably be classified as a type of yokai, couldn't they? There was also a TikTok rant video about some big balloon devil school girls with double D-cup breasts. As he listened to the guards chatting nearby, Takeo let his thoughts wander. In this era without smartphones or any kind of electronic devices, his only way of passing the time was to zone out. He had recently developed a bit of a bad habit, spacing out and letting his mind drift. With nothing around for entertainment, all he could really do was either daydream or review the combat techniques inherited from Logan. But right now, during an escort mission, there was no way he could draw his sword and train, so spacing out was all that was left. All right. That's the last of it. You there, come aboard, we're heading out. The final crates had been loaded onto the large ship, and the merchant steward called out to the guards stationed outside the vessel. Takeo snapped out of his thoughts and boarded the ship along with the others. But just as he stepped onto the deck, a particular figure caught his attention. It was a samurai, dressed in all black with a long sword at his waist. He wore a black haori over what looked like a uniform-style outfit, somewhat resembling military attire. He looked to be in his early 20s, and the merchant was personally escorting him into the cabin area. A guest of the ship? Hey! Just as Takeo was observing the figure, a sudden shout rang out beside his ear, followed by the sharp whistle of something slicing through the air. He didn't turn around. Not even a glance. He simply shifted his body slightly to the side and reached out with one hand, catching a bamboo practice sword mid-swing. At the same time, he grabbed the attacker by the collar with the same motion. It's you again, hey? Young master. Still gripping the bamboo sword, Takeo stared deadpan at the tiny kid who had ambushed him. The boy had a close-cropped haircut and wore a kimono with black floral patterns, holding a bamboo sword in hand, striking the pose of a mini samurai. But right now, this little samurai just stood there, wide-eyed and shocked. You didn't even look at me. How did you know I was trying to ambush you? If you know it's an ambush, then maybe don't shout before doing it. Takeo let go of the bamboo sword and released the kid with a sigh, completely unamused. Who yells out loud right before launching a sneak attack? The kid, hearing this, tilted his head up and lowered his voice dramatically, delivering his next line with full onshinabi energy. Humph. A true samurai fights honorably even when launching a sneak attack. If it's honorable, it's not a sneak attack. I said it's a sneak attack, so it's a sneak attack. Damn it, just you wait. Next time I'll definitely land a hit, and then you'll have to teach me swordsmanship. The little kid waved his bamboo sword furiously, shouting with puffed-up cheeks. Takeo could only sigh in exasperation. People nearby glanced over and chuckled kindly at the familiar scene, and one of the passing guards joked. Takeo, the young master's been after you for half a month now. Just teach him a move or two already. Quit messing around. Go do your job. Rolling his eyes, Takeo waved the teasing guard away. Then he looked down at the tiny boy who barely reached his chest and also waved him off. You too. Go play somewhere else. My swordsmanship isn't something I can teach. He wasn't just brushing the kid off. The fighting techniques Logan had passed down included a variety of styles. Japanese swordsmanship was just one small part of it. Takeo could use it well enough himself, but if he tried to teach someone else, it'd be nothing more than passing on a mess of hybrid techniques. Besides, the little guy was probably only excited for the moment. If he were seriously trained for a while, he'd likely give up halfway through anyway. Chapter 5, Mysterious Ship and a Demon Slayer. Let's take a moment for introductions. The energetic little kid from earlier was named Ichiro Miura, the son of the wealthy merchant Takeo was currently assigned to protect. He was 8 years old, full of boundless energy. Ever since he had witnessed Takeo defeat 3 adult guards single-handedly over 2 weeks ago, he had been clinging to him, begging to learn swordsmanship. But Takeo knew his own situation well. His sword skills weren't particularly advanced. They were the result of adapting various other close combat techniques passed down from Logan. They weren't part of any proper or consistent sword school. Trying to teach that to someone else would only end up misleading them. Takeo had already explained this to Ichiro. He'd even told him that if he really wanted to study swordsmanship, he should go to a proper DJ and receive formal training. After all, his family was wealthy. Enrolling in a kendo school wouldn't be difficult at all. But the kid had completely fixated on Takeo. According to Ichiro's logic, Takeo didn't look much older than him, yet he was strong enough to defeat 3 grown men at once, which clearly meant his swordsmanship was amazing. Why go learn from some old geezer when you had a powerful young swordsman right in front of you? Ichiro had no interest in making things harder than they needed to be. Takeo could only sigh at the situation. Since explanations weren't working, he had come up with another idea. He crafted a bamboo sword for Ichiro and told him, if you can land a hit on me with this, I'll teach you swordsmanship. And so, the little rascal began showing up every single day, waving his bamboo sword around and challenging Takeo. But to this day, the number of times Ichiro had successfully hit Takeo remained a solid 0. Seriously, Takeo could smell the kid coming from 10 meters away. If Ichiro ever managed to land a sneak attack under those conditions, Logan, who had passed on those heightened senses, might just come back from the dead out of sheer indignation. No matter how many times Takeo tried to explain things again, the kid wouldn't listen. With his chin raised in pride, Ichiro pointed his bamboo sword dramatically at Takeo and declared, "I don't care. You said that if I hit you, you'd teach me. Just wait, I'm definitely gonna land a hit before this ship reaches shore." He was full of confidence. Takeo, on the other hand, was completely speechless. Just as Ichiro turned to run off and strategize how to defeat him, Takeo casually reached out and grabbed the back of his collar like picking up a kitten. "Wait a section. I've got a question." "What kind of question?" Ichiro stopped and tilted his head. Takeo glanced toward the black-clad swordsman who had entered the ship's cabin with the merchant and asked, "Who's that swordsman? I haven't seen him before." Takeo had been serving as a bodyguard for the merchant family for over 2 weeks now, and he was confident he wouldn't mistake any of the other regular guards. Which meant the black-clad swordsman was definitely someone new. But what truly caught Takeo's attention wasn't just the unfamiliar face, it was the faint, lingering sense of danger the man exuded. That was his beast-like intuition at work, an instinctual warning of something potentially threatening. On top of that, the swordsman was wearing a real katana, not a regular blade, which only made the mystery more intriguing. That's why Takeo had asked about the man's identity. Ichiro also glanced toward the merchant and the swordsman, tilting his head in thought. "I don't know either." "You don't? Your father didn't mention anything." Since the merchant had the influence to acquire an official sword-carrying permit, it wouldn't be surprising if he had connections with someone who looked like a samurai. Takeo figured the merchant might know something important. "Nope." "Want me to eavesdrop for you? In exchange, you teach me swordsmanship." Ichiro's eyes sparkled with mischief as he spun the idea on the spot, clearly proud of his own cleverness. Takeo lightly tapped the top of Ichiro's head with the side of his hand in a mock karate chop and said, "Eavesdropping is wrong. It goes against the way of the samurai. So even if you did spy for me, I still wouldn't teach you swordsmanship." "Ugh, always coming up with excuses." "Blah. I'm off to train." The energetic little gremlin made a face at Takeo, then bolted off like a gust of wind after catching a glimpse of Takeo's pretend threatening glare. Takeo rolled his eyes at the kid's retreating back, but he didn't bother chasing after him. Instead, he shifted his gaze back toward the ship's cabin. He still didn't know who that black-clad swordsman was, but if someone that strong had been brought aboard, then it likely meant there was a chance something dangerous lay ahead on this journey. Something that only a warrior like that could handle. It seemed the road ahead wouldn't be so peaceful after all. Inside the ship's cabin, the wealthy merchant who had chartered the cargo vessel, Miura, sat across a small tea table from the ship's captain, Kiichi Mizunaki. Seated formally beside the table was the black-clad swordsman whom Miura had personally welcomed aboard earlier. His katana lay neatly beside him, placed in proper fashion. "Captain Mizunaki, are you certain you know nothing about the disappearances on this ship?" In the silent cabin, the calm voice of the young swordsman echoed. His tone was composed, but his gaze was sharp as a blade, piercing straight into Captain Kiichi Mizunaki. Nearly 40, with streaks of grey in his hair, Mizunaki's expression grew tense. His eyes darted around nervously as he stammered. I really don't know anything. It would be better for you to tell the truth, Captain Mizunaki." The swordsman's voice deepened, his warning quiet but firm. Off to the side, the slightly plump Miura quietly lit the pipe in his hand. After taking a puff, he glanced at the swordsman and said, "He's not going to tell the truth. After all, if something really is wrong on this ship, he'll have to pay me a hefty sum in compensation. Isn't that right, Captain Mizunaki?" His eyes were cold and dangerous. Miura had only learned about the rumors about sailors mysteriously disappearing aboard this vessel after he had already chartered it. It wasn't until today, when he met this demon slayer from the Demon Slayer Corps, that he finally got the full picture. The reason it had been kept from him was simple. Captain Mizunaki had deliberately hidden the information, not wanting word of the disappearances to spread among the crew or passengers. Miura could understand the reasoning. After all, it was currently winter, a dangerous season for sea travel. If a ship could be rented out during this time, the owners would earn a significant sum. That money alone could sustain them for the entire winter without needing to sail again. But Miura couldn't accept it. Because he was the one who had paid to charter the ship. If there truly was danger aboard, then he was the one at risk. To put it politely, Captain Mizunaki had withheld important information. To say it bluntly, it was practically attempted murder for profit. If the contract hadn't already been signed and the ship wasn't already en route, there was no way Miura would have agreed to go forward with this. Now that things had reached this point, blaming others wouldn't help. It was better to focus on resolving the issue. Captain Mizunaki sat on his knees, drenched in cold sweat. The demon slayer from the Demon Slayer Corps, seeing this, sighed softly. Then he turned to Tar and said, "Mr. Miura, I came because I received word that there may be a demon aboard this vessel. But whether that's true or not, I still need to investigate. For that, I'll need cooperation from both you and Captain Mizunaki." "I'll cooperate," Miura replied flatly. "But as for Captain Mizunaki, well, that's another matter entirely." Miura spoke in a low voice, taking another puff from his pipe. White smoke slowly spread through the cabin. Sweat continued to bead on Captain Mizunaki's forehead. Under the quiet pressure of the young demon slayer's gaze, he finally gave in and confessed. I'll cooperate. Fine, I admit it, people really have gone missing on this ship. But that doesn't mean there's definitely a demon on board." "Then may I ask," the demon slayer said calmly, without a trace of accusation, "how exactly did they go missing?" His tone was composed, serious, and professional, and that, in turn, eased some of Mizunaki's tension. His voice grew steadier as he began recalling the events. The disappearances always happened at night. It was like they'd go to sleep, and the next morning, they'd just be gone. At first, we thought maybe they had just gone home or disembarked quietly, but a few days ago, when we were already out at sea, someone still vanished. After that came Miura's charter request, and Captain Mizunaki made the decision to hide the disappearances. Then, a demon slayer from the Demon Slayer Corps arrived to investigate. And that was the situation as it now stood. Chapter 6, This is the famous Kimetsu no Yaiba. Takeo hadn't paid close attention before, but now that he realized something might be going on aboard this ship, he began to notice it. There was definitely something off. The merchant's entourage was fine, they all behaved normally. What stood out were the ship's crew members. This was a large wooden vessel headed for Mito, capable of carrying around 80 passengers. Excluding the guards brought by the merchant, the number of sailors and deckhands was about 20. The rest were common passengers and travelers. But among those 20 or so crew members, something felt wrong. Some of them still looked relatively normal, but others seemed nervous and fidgety, a few even showing clear signs of fear. When Takeo approached them and asked what was wrong, none of them would say a word. And with behavior like that, if he still couldn't figure out that something was happening on this ship, then he'd have to be a complete idiot. Hey! Another shout and the familiar swoosh of a bamboo sword cutting through the air behind him. Still half lost in thought, Takeo instinctively stepped to the side, caught the bamboo sword, and with one smooth motion flipped the little rascal over his shoulder. Thud! The kid hit the ground hard, but he didn't seem fazed at all. He immediately sprang back to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Takeo. Hey! That was way too rough this time. Sorry, I was thinking about something just now. Wait, why are you back again? Takeo, snapping out of his thoughts, gave Ichiro an apology that had absolutely zero sincerity behind it, then blinked in surprise. Normally, Ichiro only attacked Takeo twice a day, once in the morning, and once in the evening. But it was still a while before sunset. This second sneak attack was a bit early. Hearing Takeo's question, Ichiro seemed to suddenly remember why he'd come. He looked around suspiciously, then motioned for Takeo to lean in closer. Takeo stared at him, deadpan, but eventually obliged, bending down toward the boy's ear. Only then did Ichiro whisper in a hushed, excited tone. I overheard my father talking with that guy. You eavesdropped on them? I did not eavesdrop. Ichiro hissed, raising his voice a little, then, realizing it might have been too loud, quickly lowered it again and muttered defensively. I just happened to be walking by and overheard them, okay? Anyway, do you want to hear what I heard or not? Fine. What did you hear? Not bothering to call Ichiro out on his obvious lie, Takeo, still very curious about the identity of the mysterious swordsman, pressed further, so? What did you hear? Ichiro leaned in again and whispered softly. I heard them say, there's a demon on this ship. Demon? Takeo's eyes sharpened instantly, his expression turning serious. There's really a demon on this ship. Don't ask me, how would I know? Ichiro huffed. I just heard them say there might be a demon on board. And that mysterious guy? He's a demon slayer, here to hunt it down. That's all I heard. Ichiro gave a quick summary of the conversation. According to him, there had been disappearances on the ship and Captain Mizunaki had deliberately tried to hide it, but the demon slayer had still found out. No one knew where he got the information, but he had personally come to investigate the missing crew, and once the merchant learned about it, he welcomed the demon slayer aboard himself. Demon. Demon slayer. So that was the framework of this world. It really did have demons? Takeo mulled over this revelation and suddenly thought of Kamado Tanjiro. If the main power structure of this world really revolved around demons and demon slayers, then could Kamado Tanjiro have become either a demon, or a demon slayer? Wait a second, demon? Tanjiro? Why did that sound more and more familiar? Takeo's thoughts spun rapidly. It felt like he was on the verge of remembering something, but no matter how hard he tried to grab hold of the thought, it kept slipping away. He was missing one key piece of information, just one detail that could help him figure out what kind of world he had ended up in. Can't I have transmigrated to Harry freaking Potter? Or any other Hollywood bull crap I ever binged? It would have been so much easier. Ugh, my dreams of becoming a Hogwarts student could have come true, but no. I got shoved into a plot I don't even recognize. Oh, right, Ichiro suddenly said, as if remembering something. That demon slayer said he was from some group called the Demon Slayer Corps. I think that's what it was. Do you know what that is? A demon slayer, from the Demon Slayer Corps. Wait a minute. It hit him. Takeo's pupil shrank. All at once, he remembered what anime world this was. Demon Slayer Corps, demons, Kamado Tanjiro, Kamado Nezuko. Wasn't this the anime my college roommate used to obsess over all the time? What was it called? Hashura Slayer, the girl with two big bouncy jugs. Wait, no. That wasn't the name. It was probably Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, right? Then why did his roommate always jokingly call it Hashura Slayer? Recalling how his anime-loving roommate used to yell things like Hashura Slayer back in the dorms, Takeo felt his memory getting jumbled. He couldn't tell if his roommate had been saying the name wrong, or if he was the one misremembering, but either way, one thing was certain. This world definitely belonged to an anime. There was no doubt about that. And Tanjiro and Nezuko, they were the main characters of this world. Or rather, the male lead and female lead. So that means, the one who destroyed the Kamado family, was most likely a demon. Now that he had recalled the general setting of this world, Takeo felt certain the one who had killed the Kamado family was probably a demon. Hey! Hey! Takeo had been lost in thought for a bit too long, and Ichiro was growing impatient. He shouted right in Takeo's ear, trying to snap him out of it. Takeo, mildly annoyed by the shouting, replied without thinking. I'm listening, stop yelling. My ears are gonna go deaf. You didn't look like someone who was listening just now. Ichiro eyed him suspiciously. Takeo let out a sigh, then grabbed Ichiro's bamboo sword and lightly tapped it against his own shoulder before changing the subject. Weren't you the one who wanted me to teach you swordsmanship? That one sentence instantly made Ichiro's eyes light up. He immediately forgot about Takeo zoning out earlier and asked excitedly. You're really gonna teach me? If it's just the basics, I know a little. I'll teach you some before we reach shore. Takeo gave the bamboo sword a casual swing as he spoke. Ichiro's eyes grew brighter and when he heard the last part, he literally jumped 3 feet off the ground. Awesome! I'm gonna become a samurai! Yelling that, Ichiro ran off with his bamboo sword, hopping with joy. Agreeing to teach him a bit of swordsmanship was Takeo's way of repaying him for helping gather information about the demon slayer. Sure, he could have stuck to his earlier line, eavesdropping isn't something a true samurai should do, and used that to brush him off again. But the information Ichiro had gathered helped Takeo understand the truth of this world, and for that, he definitely owed the kid a favor. I ain't a Slytherin after all. Besides, it was just some basic swordsmanship theory. Teaching that much shouldn't be a problem. Well then, what should I do next? Now that he understood the nature of this world and knew there was a demon slayer on board, Takeo began thinking about how to approach him. After all, in this world, the conflict between demons and demon slayers was the central axis. Demon slayers likely had their own unique methods of training. And if Tanjiro really was the protagonist, there was a high chance he would become or already was a demon slayer himself. If Takeo could become one too, it would significantly increase his chances of finding Tanjiro. The real issue now was, what kind of excuse should he use to approach the demon slayer? Maybe, telling his entire family were killed by a demon? Playing the tragedy card, would that actually work? Chapter 7, The Smell of Blood. Late at night, Takeo lay in bed, tossing and turning. After learning the truth about this world, he found it hard to fall asleep. His mind had been filled with thoughts. He'd considered approaching the demon slayer, but he had also wondered if he should just disappear, go into hiding, or even flee to another country far away from the chaos. After all, if this world was based on an anime, then in the end, the protagonist would surely win. Takeo didn't have to do anything, Tanjiro would take care of everything. That had been his initial line of thinking. But then he remembered, he had stood in front of the Kamado family's graves and promised to find their killer. He couldn't just walk away now. And so he lay in bed, torn by indecision. TCH, guess I'll go talk to that demon slayer. In the end, Takeo sat up from his futon, having made up his mind he'd approach the demon slayer and try to get some information. Even setting everything else aside, he needed to understand how people in this world trained. While the abilities he inherited from Logan greatly boosted his chances of survival, his overall combat capability still wasn't particularly powerful. And if the demons in this world were as terrifying as he feared, then Logan's abilities alone likely wouldn't be enough to keep him alive. So even for the sake of self-preservation, Takeo had to find a way to obtain this world's training methods. With that thought, Takeo's determination to seek out the demon slayer solidified. It just so happened to be nighttime, and according to what he'd heard, demons only appear after dark, which meant the demon slayer was likely out patrolling right now, searching for signs of one. Since Takeo was serving as a guard aboard the ship, using patrolling as a reason to find the demon slayer would be perfectly legitimate. The only problem was, he had no idea if there actually was a demon on board. If there was, going out at night might be extremely dangerous. Leaving his quarters, Takeo moved through the ship's corridors, searching for any sign of the demon slayer. He had memorized the man's scent during the day now, all he had to do was follow it, and he should be able to track him down easily. Or so Takeo had thought. But he had only walked a short distance before he stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he turned his head toward another direction. The smell of blood. A faint, metallic scent drifted through the air. Since his transmigration had started with him crawling out of a blood-soaked grave, Takeo had become especially sensitive to the scent of blood. And if he could smell it this clearly here, it meant someone had suffered a serious injury, high blood loss. At night, with the scent of blood in the air, and someone was hurt. This was not good. Several key factors pieced together in Takeo's mind and a vague suspicion began to form. His expression turned grim as he tightened his grip on the katana the merchant had given him, cautiously moving in the direction of the scent of blood. The source of the blood was located below deck, in the cargo hold, a place that, under normal circumstances, should be completely empty at night. But the closer he got, the more intense the scent became. And along with the smell of blood, he picked up the scent of the demon slayer and Ichir. Ichir. The moment Takeo recognized Miura Ichire's scent in the air, he instinctively broke into a run. He rushed down into the cargo hold and kicked the door open with one swift motion. What he saw on the other side made him instinctively hold his breath. Blood. The first thing that registered in his vision was the bright red blood, splattered across the floor and walls. The second thing he saw was Ichir, lying in a pool of blood, his condition unknown. And then, just past him, the demon slayer, standing protectively in front of Ichir, facing off against a demon, half of its body submerged in the shadows lurking in the water. Kakik, oh? Another one? Perfect. I'll eat you too and replenish my strength. The water demon, half submerged in the shadows, with horns on its head and blue wave-like markings across its skin, immediately shifted its attention to Takeo the moment it noticed his arrival. The demon slayer, who was standing guard over Ichir, saw this and his pupils contracted sharply. He shouted. Run! Get out of here, don't just stand there. Kahoo, too late. The water demon let out a wicked grin and lunged straight at Takeo. The demon slayer's face twisted with urgency. Despite the injuries covering his body, he charged after the demon, trying to intercept, but he was too slow. Injured and already lagging behind, he couldn't close the distance in time. By the time the demon's claws were just about to strike, the demon slayer had barely covered half the distance. He could only watch in horror, convinced he was about to witness yet another child torn apart by a demon. That's how it should have gone. But... what? The demon cried out in disbelief, and the demon slayer's eyes widened in shock. Because just as the demon's claws were about to reach Takeo, he bent low, dodging with razor-thin precision at an impossible angle, completely evading the attack. And it didn't end there. While dodging, Takeo had at some point drawn the katana at his waist. In the flickering light of the cargo hold, the blade flashed through the air in a perfect arc, cleanly slicing through the water demon's throat. A single, precise slash to the neck, but Takeo didn't press the attack. Instead, he quickly shifted positions, creating distance between himself and the demon, rushing deeper into the hold straight to where Ichir lay in a pool of blood. What happened to him? What the hell is going on? Cradling Ichir, whose breathing was shallow and weak, Takeo felt the boy's body growing colder by the second. He couldn't stop himself from yelling at the demon slayer. The young demon slayer snapped out of his stunned daze. His eyes flicked briefly to the blade in Takeo's hand, then he responded. That demon caught him. It was about to eat him. I got there just in time to pull him out. That was the demon slayer's explanation. Takeo looked down at Ichir again. There was indeed a large bite wound on his shoulder, with blood still pouring out of it. Did it hit an artery? No, it looks like a deep but non-fatal wound. Even so, the amount of blood loss was dangerously high. Ichir's condition was critical. He needed a doctor, and fast. Another demon slayer? And a kid, no less. Came the voice of the water demon. The deep gash across its neck, which should have been fatal, was already completely healed. But perhaps wary of Takeo's precision strike, the demon didn't make any sudden moves for the moment. It stood by the door, blocking the entrance to the cargo hold, its long tongue licking the blood from the corner of its mouth as it fixed its gaze on the three of them huddled together. The demon slayer readied his blade again in silence. He didn't bother responding to the demon's words. Instead, with his back to Takeo, he said firmly. Kid, I'll hold him off. You take the boy and get out of here, find a doctor. He paused briefly before continuing. Once you get out, keep going until you run into someone, don't stop for anything. Can you do that? Will you be okay? Takeo stared at the demon slayer's back, at the wounds on his arm and leg, and asked with clear concern. This demon slayer didn't look like he had much fight left in him. And if he died here, Even if Takeo managed to escape with Ichir, how far could they really get? After a moment of thought, no more than a second, Takeo quickly moved to stop Ichir's bleeding, wrapping the wound tightly to stem the blood flow. Then he gripped his katana and stepped up to stand beside the demon slayer. I don't know exactly what's going on, but maybe I can help. What? Don't be ridiculous, you saw it yourself, your sword didn't do any real damage to that demon. A normal person can't possibly fight something like this. Seeing that Takeo intended to fight beside him, the demon slayer couldn't help but raise his voice in protest. Takeo, however, had already realized what the issue was. This creature, this thing called a demon, seemed to possess an extremely powerful regenerative ability, almost on par with Logan's full strength healing factor. And against someone like that, no amount of ordinary damage would matter. Takeo understood that perfectly. But I can buy you some time, right? You know how to kill it, don't you? He said, flashing a confident smile. It was true he had no means of killing a demon himself, but if this man was called a demon slayer, then that meant he must have a way to finish it. Takeo couldn't take one down alone, but if he worked together with the demon slayer, everything could change. He could distract the demon, draw its attention, create an opening, maybe even help land the final blow. You. The demon slayer began, clearly still against the idea, but he didn't get the chance to finish. The water demon wasn't about to let them keep talking. Seeing the two of them standing side by side, it grinned wickedly. Kill me? Don't make me laugh. You're both going to die here tonight as my dinner. As the last word left its mouth, the demon stomped the floor. In an instant, two razor-sharp blades of water surged through the air, one aimed straight at Takeo, the other at the demon slayer. Chapter 8, the battle had officially begun. What the hell was that? A supernatural ability. Seeing the water demon control flowing water to form sharp blades, Takeo's pupils narrowed. He hadn't expected this. On top of their rapid regeneration, demons could also manipulate elements. Was this some kind of water-based technique? Is this demon a water bender or something? Don't tell me every demon is like this. As the blades of water flew toward him, Takeo had no way to judge how powerful they were, so he didn't take the risk. He dodged to the side without hesitation. The demon slayer beside him made the same split-second decision, diving in the opposite direction. Both of them moved fast. In the next instant, the two blades of water tore through the space where they had just been standing and slammed into the stacked cargo behind them, wooden crates filled with porcelain. Crash! The boxes were split in two like paper. Several toppled down, shattering their contents across the floor. The battle had officially begun. Now that the water demon had attacked, Takeo didn't waste a single breath on words. The moment he evaded the strike, he launched himself toward the demon. The demon slayer, seeing this, didn't hold back either. Just from that first slash when Takeo entered the cargo hold and struck at the water demon, it was already clear he had what it took to fight a demon. And now, after easily dodging the demon's blood demon art, his capabilities were even more evident. He might not have trained in any formal breathing technique, but this boy, young as he looked, was undeniably strong. The demon slayer wasn't foolish. He wasn't about to reject a capable ally in a situation like this. So when he saw Takeo charging at the demon again, the slayer raised his Nichiren sword and rushed in from the opposite direction, calling out a warning. Watch out for his blood demon art. He can control the water inside the ship. Blood demon art? So that was what this demon's supernatural ability was called? Takeo noted it mentally and began deliberately avoiding the puddles scattered across the floor. Earlier, on his way into the cargo hold, he had noticed how damp the air smelled. He had chalked it up to being at sea. Water was everywhere, after all. He hadn't realized the water itself was being created and manipulated by the demon. Now aware of the danger, Takeo weaved around the wet patches and resumed his charge. The water demon, meanwhile, raised both of its pale arms and opened its hands wide, each pointed directly at Takeo and the demon slayer. The water pooled on the floor began to ripple and writhe. And before there was even time to blink, it surged upward, forming multiple water arrows that shot out from the ground, targeting both Takeo and the demon slayer. Blood demon art, water arrows. Takeo had already been keeping a close eye on the puddles and reacted instantly, dodging to the side. But the arrows were too fast, and there were too many. A few of them grazed him, cutting shallow wounds across his arms and shoulders. Still, for Takeo, those minor scrapes meant nothing. Using the brief opening created by the demon's attack, he closed the gap and charged forward, raising his blade and slashing toward the demon's neck. The cold steel flashed. But the demon narrowly twisted out of range at the last second. "Kahoo, you brat," the demon sneered. "You think you can hit me a second time?" Its lower body, fluid and shifting like water, had coiled into a serpentine tail. With a whip-like motion, it used that tail to vault backward, creating space between them. From a distance, the demon let out a mocking laugh. But it didn't last. Because at that very moment, the demon slayer appeared right at the demon's side. The demon slayer leapt high into the air, his blade wreathed in an invisible current. A massive slash of wind surged forward, roaring downward with the momentum to cleave the water demon in half. Wind breathing, fifth form, cold mountain wind. Takeo's eyes widened. The powerful burst of wind that exploded from the demon slayer's blade left him stunned. That's a real, otherworldly display of power. Proved beyond all doubt this world really did have its own combat techniques and systems of training unique to humanity. Unfortunately, the demon slayer's strength still wasn't enough. The fearsome, howling wind blade, which had been aimed squarely at the demon's neck, missed by the narrowest of margins. Instead of severing its head, the attack only managed to slice off the demon's right arm. Tch. How terrifying! As expected of a demon slayer. If I hadn't dodged just in time, you really might have taken my head off. The water demon sneered. But what a shame you were this close. Its grotesque grin widened. Dodging the demon slayer's strike, it immediately launched a counterattack. While the demon slayer was still midair and vulnerable, the demon manipulated the surrounding water in the hold. The liquid writhed like a living serpent, surging toward him to coil and bite down on its target. "Look out!" Takeo shouted. Seeing that the demon slayer was about to be entangled by the serpent-like water attack, Takeo immediately gave up his offensive on the water demon and changed course, rushing to his ally's side. Just as the water coils were about to wrap around the demon slayer, Takeo tackled him aside. Thud roll! Clutching the demon slayer, the two of them tumbled across the floor, narrowly dodging the writhing water tendrils. They quickly separated and scrambled to their feet, both of them turning to face the demon once more. The water demon didn't follow up with another attack. Instead, it picked up its severed arm, the one the demon slayer had cut off, and placed it back against its shoulder. Within the blink of an eye, the limb reattached itself and fully regenerated. "Okay. Now that's just insane," Takeo muttered, unable to hold back a comment. The rate at which this thing could heal was ridiculous. Any injury Takeo inflicted on it would close up within seconds, while attacks it landed on him would take over 10 minutes to heal, even with his enhanced regeneration. If it had been anyone else without that kind of ability, even killing the demon would come at a devastating cost. They'd be left half dead, if not worse. "That's a demon for you," the Slayer said grimly. "Count yourself lucky this room is tight. He can't move at full speed in here. If he could, he'd be even harder to handle." The Demon Slayer spoke in a low voice. Demons far surpassed humans in physical ability. Their strength, speed, endurance, and resilience were all many times greater than that of ordinary people. Only by relying on breathing techniques could members of the Demon Slayer Corps barely manage to fight them on equal footing. Even then, a Demon Slayer's healing ability was still that of a normal human. It couldn't compare to a demon's regeneration. Especially when facing a demon with a blood demon art, even a fully trained swordsman with mastery of a breathing style could still die. And the demon they were up against now, was exactly that, a high-ranking demon capable of using a blood demon art. Someone like this should normally be dealt with by a group of demon slayers working together, but unfortunately, due to a lack of manpower and intel, only this one swordsman had been sent. And alongside him now was just a kid with a bit of combat skill. So how do we kill it? Takeo hadn't noticed the glance the demon slayer gave him. He was too focused on the problem at hand, how to kill something that could regenerate so absurdly fast. The demon slayer exhaled slowly and explained, "There are two ways. First, use the blade in my hand and sever his head." "Yeah, I've seen how well that's going for you. What's the second method?" "Ahem. Wait until sunrise." "Hey. Demons are weak to sunlight. If we can hold out until dawn, and break through the ceiling to let sunlight in, he's finished." The demon slayer revealed the two key weaknesses of demons. But upon hearing that, Takeo fell silent. Severing the demon's head clearly wasn't going to work, not with the slayer already wounded and the demon too fast. As for sunlight, it was barely past midnight and it was winter, meaning sunrise would come even later. If they wanted to kill the water demon using the second method, they'd have to survive for at least 6 more hours. And against a demon this powerful, one who vastly outclassed both of them, not even 1 hour seemed likely, let alone 6. The weight of the situation settled in. Takeo felt despair creeping up his spine. How were they supposed to win this? Headbutt him to death? Chapter 9, I refuse to die here. Not now. Not like this. As it stood, the demon before them had speed and strength that far exceeded both Takeo and the demon slayer. On top of that, it had terrifying regeneration and a blood demon art that functioned like a supernatural ability. It was clear this enemy was not someone the two of them could handle alone. Takeo had a bit of hand-to-hand combat skill and a weak regenerative ability, barely enough to be called special in front of this fucker's healing. The demon slayer had training and a breathing technique, but even so, his overall strength was still below that of the water demon. The only thing between the two of them that posed a real threat to the demon, was the demon slayer's Nichiren sword. And yet, the slayer hadn't been able to land a clean hit to the neck. What's wrong? Done attacking already? In that case, the water demon said, voice twisted with irritation. He flexed his recently reattached right arm, then suddenly swung it toward the floor, his expression contorting into a snarl. Let me take a turn, then. Whoosh! Countless droplets of water lifted from the floor, and in the blink of an eye, they sharpened into needle-like spikes, hurtling toward the two of them in a dense barrage. There was no time to think. Both Takeo and the demon slayer immediately leapt into motion, dodging while simultaneously swinging their blades to deflect the incoming spikes. Clang! 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 They rang out like metal against steel. Despite being made of liquid, the spikes struck with the hardness and sound of forged blades. Takeo's sword was dented in an instant, battered by the barrage of water spikes. A few even struck his body, cutting through his clothes and drawing blood. He turned to check on the demon slayer. Although the slayer had also been hit, his uniform had absorbed the impact. The thin water spikes weren't able to pierce it. That black outfit, resembling a military uniform, had shockingly high defensive capabilities. What kind of futuristic gear is this? Takeo couldn't help but envy the slayer's equipment, but he also knew that even with it, it wasn't enough to fully protect against the water demon. The wounds on the slayer's body made that much clear. The demon still had ways of bypassing the uniform's defense. Dodging the flurry of spikes, the slayer once again lunged at the demon, Nichiren blade swinging. Takeo tightened his grip on his sword and followed close behind, but his eyes darted side to side as he moved, searching for anything useful. After all, what separates humans from beasts is their ability to use tools. If he couldn't overpower the demon directly, then why not look for a tool that could? They were in a cargo hold, after all. Among the goods being transported by the merchant Miyuratar, there were plenty of things beyond just porcelain. Could something in here be used against a demon? Takeo's mind was racing as he fought, coordinating attacks alongside the demon slayer. Despite it being their first time meeting, let alone fighting side by side, their teamwork was surprisingly fluid. At a glance, it even looked like they were evenly matched against the water demon. But both of them knew that was an illusion. The only reason they were keeping up was because the demon was deliberately avoiding close combat, refusing to engage directly with the slayer's sword. It clearly understood that the Nichiren blade posed a real threat. Instead, it relied on its blood demon art to keep them both at bay with long-range pressure. This wouldn't last. Human stamina couldn't compare to that of demons. Even Takeo, with his enhanced endurance, couldn't keep up indefinitely. If this dragged on any longer, they'd both die here. Hey! Takeo called out through gritted teeth, frustrated that he hadn't found a useful tool. He turned to the demon slayer. That technique you used earlier when your blade was wrapped in wind, what was that? That's a breathing technique. Why are you asking about that now? The demon slayer replied quickly, still keeping his eyes locked on the enemy. Yes, that's it. Teach me. Takeo shouted back, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the slayer, his tone resolute. What? The demon slayer froze, staring at Takeo like he'd just said something insane. Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to learn breathing techniques? I don't. Takeo shot back immediately. But do we have any other way to get stronger right now? He didn't know how hard it actually was to learn a breathing style. But with his enhanced body and Wolverine's combat instincts, he figured his learning curve would be way faster than the average person's. There was a massive difference between someone who had never trained and someone who had years of combat experience. And right now, if there was any hope of boosting his power quickly, it was through the breathing technique the Slayer had just used. It was his only shot. At this point, the situation was already desperate. No matter how impossible it sounded, he had to try. The Demon Slayer was silent for a moment. Takeo wasn't wrong. Aside from teaching him breathing, there was no other way left to increase their chances of survival. It was still hours until dawn. They were at sea. There wasn't a single other person on board capable of fighting a demon. Just this boy, this strange, persistent boy who refused to back down. There was no choice. Even if it was like treating a dying horse with medicine, the Demon Slayer had to try. He had to teach Takeo the basics of a breathing technique. Listen carefully. The breathing style I use is called wind breathing. It has a total of 9 forms. The breathing technique itself is. The Demon Slayer spoke rapidly, quickly explaining the fundamentals of the technique he had learned. But before he could finish, the water demon's attacks came crashing down once more. Like a predator toying with its prey, the demon conjured a barrage of fine water needles, launching wave after wave of densely packed strikes that were nearly impossible to dodge. In such conditions, Takeo's wounds continued to multiply. The Demon Slayer, though not visibly injured thanks to his uniform, was clearly struggling too. Takeo could hear his breathing grow heavier, his stamina depleting fast. Despite the onslaught, the Slayer continued to explain, albeit in broken intervals, the principles and training methods behind breathing techniques. According to him, the core of a breathing style lay in enhancing the heart and lungs, enabling the blood to absorb oxygen in massive quantities instantly. This, in turn, would amplify the body's physical capabilities across the board: strength, speed, endurance, bringing a demon slayer to the level needed to contend with a demon. That was the foundation upon which the Demon Slayer core stood. Without it, no human could hope to fight demons on equal ground. All breathing styles originated from the basic breathing technique, which served as the root. Currently, the core trained its swordsmen in 5 major styles: flame, water, wind, thunder, and stone. Every new member of the core began by learning one of these fundamental styles. Only by mastering it and surviving the final selection could one become an official demon slayer. Beyond the foundational breathing styles, there were rare individuals, geniuses, who could use those core styles as a base to create entirely new, personalized breathing techniques. But those were exceptions, and the Demon Slayer didn't go into that. The style he used was wind breathing, characterized by its speed and sharpness. When wielded properly, wind breathing could generate slicing gusts capable of cutting down enemies or entangling them in currents of wind to restrict movement. Although the Demon Slayer had trained in wind breathing, he hadn't mastered all of its forms. His strongest were the 2nd form and the 5th form, and so those were the only 2 he passed on to Takeo. Learning a breathing technique in the middle of battle was supposed to be impossible. But even knowing that, the Slayer still taught Takeo everything he could just in case. Talking during battle disrupted his own breathing rhythm, and he had already been fighting the water demon for a long time. His stamina was nearing its limit. So it was no surprise when, during one of his attacks, the Slayer finally slipped up. The demon spotted the opening and slammed a vicious kick straight into the Slayer's gut. Boom! Shit! Ugh! The Demon Slayer's body shot back like a cannonball, crashing into a stack of nearby crates. Crash, clang, thud. Wood and cargo scattered in every direction. He lay there, sprawled in the wreckage, trying to get back up, but in the end, he couldn't. In contrast, the water demon, though covered in wounds, had already healed completely. Its stamina seemed slightly drained, but its overall condition was solid, like it could keep fighting for a long time still. Well, what's the matter? Done already? I was so scared of you demon slayers I ran all the way up to this ship, and this is all you've got. Having taken down the demon slayer, the demon began taunting them with arrogant bravado. Its long tongue licked across its lips, and its eyes gleamed with hunger, the kind that only came from craving flesh. Seeing that the demon slayer couldn't get back up, the demon tilted its head and turned to look at Takeo, who was still gripping his sword tightly. Hey, kid! He's finished. You really planning to keep fighting? Tell you what, why don't you do me a favor and finish him off for me? If you do, I'll let you and that little brat over there go. You don't look like you've got much meat on you anyway. Maybe it was because Takeo looked thin and less appetizing than the demon slayer, but the demon seemed willing to let him live. Takeo said nothing. He's lying. That demon, he said he'd let them go. But he won't. Takeo could see it in the demon's eyes. There was no mercy there. Only hunger and anger for the previous wounds that Takeo had given him. So this is the fear of death. This wasn't just some random fight. This is his second chance. He used to be just another face in the crowd. Another nobody. But somehow by some miracle he'd gotten a new life. A stronger body. A cheat code. So what if learning a breathing technique in a few minutes is supposed to be impossible? If he doesn't learn it now, he dies. That's it. That's the truth. So really, there is no choice. No second thoughts. No hesitation. I have to do this. I will do this. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. The cold air inside the cargo hold flowed through his windpipe, down into his lungs, and spread through his entire body. Following the instructions the demon slayer had given him, Takeo was trying to grasp the foundation of this world's power, the path of the breathing technique. Seeing that Takeo wasn't responding, the water demon lost its patience. The Nichiren sword capable of harming him wasn't in Takeo's hands. There was no longer any need for caution. Lowering his body, baring his fangs, the demon snarled. Not gonna answer. Inhale. Exhale. He could feel the wind, feel it running through his lungs, coiling inside his chest, surging into his limbs. Something was awakening. Something sharp. Fierce. Then die. Boom. In an instant, the demon's body vanished from where it stood. Whipping its long, serpentine water tail behind it, the demon moved faster than the eye could follow. In the blink of an eye, it had already closed the distance, appearing right in front of Takeo. The demon slayer, still collapsed in the wreckage of broken crates, saw what was happening. He struggled with everything he had to stand, but his body wouldn't respond. All he could do was watch eyes wide as the demon's claws tore through the air, ready to rip apart the red-haired boy before him. But just as the attack was about to land, wind stirred inside the cargo hold. His animal-like instincts roared. I refuse to die here. Not now. Not like this. Invisible currents coiled around Takeo's blade, and in the next breath, with the force of the wind behind him, Takeo brought the sword crashing down toward the demon's head. Slash! 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 4 slashing wind blades tore through the water demon's body like claws. 4 deep wounds split open across its torso, and a torrent of blood burst forth, spattering across the floor and mixing with the water pooled beneath them. That's... The demon slayer's eyes went wide, wider than they had the entire fight. As a practitioner of wind breathing, no one understood what had just happened better than he did. What Takeo had just unleashed was unmistakably wind breathing. The very technique he had just taught him. Wind breathing, second form, claw purifying wind. Chapter 10, When the Wind Fell. The demon slayer had never expected a miracle. When Takeo insisted he could learn wind breathing right there, in the middle of a battle, the slayer had thought it was absurd. He didn't believe anyone could master a breathing technique in mere minutes, something that had taken him nearly a full year to grasp. And he certainly hadn't believed that Takeo would actually manage to unleash a technique, especially one infused with elemental power. But still, he taught him. He'd figured, even if Takeo could only pick up the barest fundamentals, even if he couldn't fight, it might be enough for him to escape. The boy looked barely 11 or 12, but he was clearly gifted. If there was even a sliver of a chance he could get away alive, then teaching him was worth it. If Takeo could survive, the effort wouldn't be in vain. But the reality had far exceeded the slayer's expectations. A miracle unfolded before his very eyes. That boy, the one who wasn't even half his age, had not only grasped the fundamentals of breathing in less than 30 minutes. He had successfully unleashed a form of wind breathing. The familiar gust stirred through the cargo hold, and the razor-sharp wind blades slashed across the demon's body like claws. And because the demon had underestimated him, because it hadn't imagined for a second that this boy could use a breathing technique, it had paid the price. The raging wind tore through half of the demon's body, slicing off an arm and even severing its head, which thudded to the floor. This is impossible. The demon's shocked cry echoed the exact same disbelief that had surged in the demon slayer's heart moments earlier. Because it was impossible. No one could go from knowing nothing to mastering a breathing form in mere moments. And even more absurd, no one could unleash a form of wind breathing the instant they learned it. The demon slayer had never seen such a talent. He had never even heard of one. And yet now such a prodigy stood right before his eyes. Huff. Huff. Inhale, Exhale. The sound of the red-haired boy's strained breathing pulled the Slayer out of his daze. He looked up at Takeo, whose face was flushed red from the strain of using breathing technique for the first time, and then down at the water demon, whose severed head was slowly creeping back toward its body, trying to reattach. In that split second, the Slayer made his decision. "Take this!" he shouted, flinging his Nichiren sword toward the boy. "Use the same form. Aim for the neck. It's the only way to kill it." The demon slayer hurled his Nichiren sword with all his strength toward the boy. The water demon, seeing the blade spinning through the air, instantly realized that if Takeo got hold of that sword, it would mean death. So, as the blade flew, the demon launched a desperate counterattack. Don't even think about it. With what little remained of its body, it activated its blood demon art again. The water scattered across the floor surged upward, transforming into several long serpents, all lashing out to intercept the airborne sword. But the boy was faster. Takeo leapt high into the air, rising to meet the spinning blade mid-flight. The wind stirred by his controlled breathing surged around him, lending him lift and force. And because the demon slayer had been closer to him than the demon was, it was only natural before the water serpents could strike the blade, Takeo's fingers closed tightly around the hilt. The moment he gripped the sword, he shifted his breathing. A massive, howling wind erupted, violent and razor-sharp, wrapping around the Nichiren blade like a cyclone. The roaring gusts howled so fiercely, they seemed ready to tear the cargo hold apart. "Damn it, damn it, damn it!" In the demon's eyes, reflected within those bloodshot pupils, was the image of Takeo descending with his sword. Panicking, the water demon reoriented its blood demon art, commanding the water serpents to form a writhing shield, desperately trying to protect its neck. The water demon didn't want to die. Even more than that, it didn't want to die like this in such a ridiculous, humiliating way. It had only been a moment of carelessness. Just one brief lapse. Just one unexpected mistake. How had it come to this? Its pupils trembled in disbelief as it frantically tried to manipulate its shattered body, desperately forcing the pieces to reattach and regenerate. But by then, the wind had already fallen. Centered around the boy, a massive spiral of air like the blades of a grinder descended. The towering wind slash, driven by the boy's breath, tore through the demon's writhing shield of water serpents like they were nothing. Shredded. Snarling, the demon forced the broken water serpents to reform, shaping them into sharp blades of liquid and flinging them toward the boy in retaliation. Under normal circumstances, Takeo should have dodged. Anyone would. To not dodge meant letting those water blades pierce his flesh, stab straight through his vitals. No one wanted to die. Survival was instinct. From the demon's perspective, there was no question the boy would surely twist his body and dodge the fatal strike. There was no way he would trade blow for blow. No way he'd throw his life away just to land a hit. But just like the demon hadn't expected the boy to master a breathing technique in such a short time, it never imagined that the boy wouldn't dodge. He could slowly regenerate from this, but if he let this crucial moment go and failed to kill this demon, then this demon, who had far superior regeneration than him, would surely kill him. Not only did Takeo refuse to avoid the incoming blades, he accelerated his descent. He drove the spiraling storm of wind down even harder, ignoring the water blades that had already pierced his body, ignoring the pain, the damage, the blood. In that moment, the fire burning in his eyes reflected only one thing: the demon. And then, the wind fell. The Nichiren sword, wrapped in roaring, bladed wind, carved clean through the demon's neck, severing it completely from the portion still connected to its body. Struck by the demon-slaying blade, the water demon's regenerative abilities ceased instantly. Its body began to disintegrate. Takeo's body, too, fell crashing heavily to the ground below. Damn it, damn it, damn it! This can't be real. This isn't happening. It's fake. Just a hallucination. The water demon shrieked from the floor, writhing as its head dissolved into the blood-soaked water. It screamed at the unconscious boy lying still in the spreading crimson. A boy who should never have won. Who shouldn't even have survived. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was a dream. A ridiculous, impossible nightmare. The water demon refused to accept reality, but the cold sinking into its bones made it undeniable. Its body was crumbling, disintegrating, and there was no stopping it. A creature that was supposed to be immortal, was dying by a demon slayer's blade. And the worst part? It wasn't even the slayer who killed it. It was a brat. A damned little brat, a monster in human form. Damn it, if I'd just kept eating, I could have become Tears spilled from its eyes. With bitterness, with rage, with the last of its unspoken ambition fush. The water demon turned to ash. Reflected in its fading pupils, was the boy who had slain it. Only after the demon crumbled completely, only when nothing was left but dust, did Takeo finally close his eyes. Silence. The warehouse fell into a deathly stillness. The demon slayer stared blankly at the scene before him, unable to react. Even he hadn't expected it. That a boy, someone so young, would become the key to defeating the demon. It was a long time before he could move. Only after his strength began to return did he finally push himself to his feet. As soon as he got to his feet, the demon slayer rushed to the boy's side and began checking his condition. His injuries are bad, really bad, but thank God, he's still alive. Hang in there. You hear me, kid? You'd better not die on me now. He grabbed the boy Takeo, pulling him into a firm hold, then reached for the injured Ichiro and hoisted the younger child up as well. With one boy cradled in his arms and the other slung across his back, the slayer staggered out of the ruined warehouse. Only once he was outside did he draw in a deep breath, summon what little strength he had left, and roar with all the force his lungs could muster, using total concentration breathing to amplify his voice. Someone! Anybody! Help! The shout echoed through the ship, piercing the cold, silent night and snapping the entire crew awake. Chapter 11, Wisteria House and Invitation. Drip-ting. A drop of water fell from above, landing on the calm, mirror-like surface below, ripples slowly expanding from the point of impact. Takeo lay motionless atop the still water, his entire body consumed by fatigue. Breathing techniques weren't something one could master easily. Even though he had inherited Logan's combat instincts and experience, even though the techniques honed over 200 years had helped him skip countless steps, had allowed him to instantly understand the meaning behind breathing, that didn't eliminate the toll. The strain from forcing his body to perform the technique remained. That final moment, when he brought his blade down on the water demon, even as countless water blades flew toward him, it wasn't that he didn't want to dodge. Takeo's body wasn't yet accustomed to the demands of a breathing technique. The moment he tried to change his stance or shift to another form, his muscles locked up. Had he chosen to dodge at that moment, the backlash of forcing his body to obey the unfamiliar rhythm would have frozen him mid-movement. And if that had happened, he'd have been helpless. A perfect target for the demon's killing blow. So Takeo didn't dodge. He couldn't dodge. Relying on his superhuman regenerative ability passed down from old Man Logan, he chose to trade injury for victory and succeeded in killing a demon wielding a blood demon art. But one of those blades might have pierced his heart. Even here, within his consciousness, his body felt unbearably heavy. He couldn't even lift a finger. So tired. He just wanted to keep sleeping. Wake up, Takeo. A gentle woman's voice whispered by his ear. There was sorrow in that voice. A quiet, aching grief. Drawn by it, Takeo forced himself to stir, clinging to consciousness, refusing to let himself drift away. You still haven't found Tanjiro and Nezuko. You can't sleep yet. Takeo. Please, live. Who was that? The voice sounded familiar, and warm. So warm, like a mother's voice. Floating between sleep and wakefulness, Takeo slowly opened his eyes. In the endless dark void surrounding him, he could faintly make out a woman in a flowing white kimono, her face blurred by shadow, her expression unreadable. But he could feel her tears as she gently cupped his cheek. Even if he couldn't see her clearly, she felt so familiar. Mom. Takeo didn't know why, but he instinctively called out to the woman, and then, his consciousness could no longer hold on. He sank back into darkness. Only this time, unlike before, it wasn't a heavy sleep born from exhaustion or despair, it felt like simple, peaceful rest. His regeneration seemed to be working overtime. Takeo had no idea how long he had been unconscious when he finally opened his eyes again. But this time, it wasn't the dark, dreamlike space of his mind that greeted him, it was a warm, sunlit room. He was lying on a tatami mat. Sunlight poured in through the open shoji doors, washing over him in golden light. The warmth made him want to stay still forever. Just rest here a little longer. But it seemed someone had been waiting for him to wake. Not long after he stirred, he heard footsteps approaching, and then, a gentle woman's voice beside him. You're awake? Thank goodness. Please have some breakfast first. I'll call the doctor in afterward. Takeo slowly turned his head toward the voice. Sitting just inside the doorway was a kind-faced older woman in a soft lavender kimono, smiling warmly at him. Beside her was a small tray, a neatly arranged breakfast of rice, clear soup, and a few side dishes. Prepared, just for him. Takeo stared blankly at the woman for a moment before he finally reacted. Thanks. You're very welcome. Please enjoy your breakfast. Okay. Wait, no. Instinctively sitting upright and taking the tray in his hands, Takeo suddenly remembered everything. He looked at the woman in a rush, blurting out all at once. Where is this? Why am I here? What happened to the demon? Is it dead? What about the kid? No, Miura Ichiro, is he okay? Don't start squawking questions the moment you wake up. You're being noisy. The one who answered him wasn't the older woman. It was a voice from further down the corridor. It belonged to the demon slayer. Takeo looked toward the voice, and sure enough, there he was emerging into the sunlight. Short black hair, dressed in the demon slayer corps uniform, a Nichiren sword at his side. As he walked closer, he gave Takeo a slight smile. Yo! Morning! How was your rest? It's you, the demon slayer. The name's Yoshizuru Asato, he said. That's my actual name. The young man introduced himself. Only now did Takeo finally learn his name, Yoshizuru Asato. It sounded elegant, the kind of name you'd expect from a refined nobleman. Though judging by his face and demeanor, that didn't quite match. I'm Kamado Takeo. Takeo responded politely. It was only proper to return the introduction with his own name. Then, without wasting a second, he asked, so, what's the situation now? If you're still here and okay, then that demon must be dead, right? Yeah, dead. You killed it. Yoshizuru exhaled, half laughing. I nearly had a heart attack watching you. You'd just learned the breathing technique, and you were already pulling that off? Where the hell did you come from, kid? And at your age? He sat down beside Takeo. At some point, the older woman who had brought breakfast had quietly slipped away, leaving just the two of them in the room. Once settled, Yoshizuru spoke again. But let's not get into all that right now. Eat first. We'll talk business afterward. Takeo was about to object, but that's when he noticed he was starving. His stomach rumbled loudly in response. Yoshizuru grinned and chuckled. Ha! Hungry, hey? Makes sense. You were out for 2 days. If the doctor hadn't said you'd be fine, I was about ready to carry you to the butterfly mansion myself and have Shinobu-sama patch you up. Sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. What's the butterfly mansion? And who's Shinobu-sama? It's fine. You just focus on eating, I'll explain everything. Asato sat cross-legged, arms folded, calmly watching Takeo. Seeing he was serious, Takeo didn't hold back any longer. He picked up his chopsticks and began eating with vigor. While Takeo devoured the meal, Asato started to explain what had happened during the 2 days he'd been unconscious. First of all, the demon from that night was truly dead. It had been completely destroyed by Takeo's wind breathing. No chance of coming back. Then, there was Miura Ichiro, the kid who had been bitten. Though he'd suffered a nasty wound on his shoulder, they had managed to save him in time. In fact, the little rascal had woken up before Takeo and immediately started yelling that Takeo had to teach him swordsmanship because Takeo had promised. As for Ichiro's father, the wealthy merchant, once he learned what had happened, he immediately brought the ship to shore and hired a doctor to treat both Asato and Takeo. He even left behind a generous amount of money as thanks. After Asato had recovered a bit, he brought Takeo here. The Wisteria House. The Wisteria House. Takeo mumbled, cheeks puffed out with rice, as he looked over at Asato in confusion. It's a family that was once saved by the Demon Slayer Corps, Asato explained. They grow wisteria flowers around their property, and their family crest is modeled after the wisteria pattern, too. Out of gratitude for what the Corps did for them, they provide food, shelter, and care to any demon slayers who come to their home completely free of charge. There are wisteria houses located all across the country. If you're ever injured or need rest, just look for the nearest one, they'll take care of you. Takeo nodded while chewing, then suddenly paused. He pointed to himself, confused. Wait, take care of me? I'm not in the Demon Slayer Corps. At that, Asato shifted his posture into a formal kneel. His expression turned serious as he looked Takeo straight in the eye. That's exactly what I need to talk to you about, Kamado Takeo. Do you want to join the Demon Slayer Corps? Yoshizuru Asato was officially extending an invitation. Chapter 12, You're far too talented to waste. Join the Demon Slayer Corps. That's right, Asato said, nodding. Even though you're still young 12, maybe, your talent is undeniable. I've never seen anyone who could use a breathing technique immediately after first learning it. Someone like you. You were born to slay demons. So, I'd like to invite you to join the Demon Slayer Corps. Yoshizuru Asato's voice was firm and sincere. In all the time since he had joined the Corps himself, he had never seen someone grasp breathing techniques so quickly. Someone with this kind of natural aptitude was exactly the kind of rare talent the Demon Slayer Corps needed most. Asato even believed Takeo had the potential to become a Hashura, one of the 9 elite swordsmen who stood at the very top of the Corps. And perhaps not even that far into the future. He didn't know much about Takeo's background, but that didn't matter. So long as he wasn't a demon, that was all that mattered. Takeo didn't respond right away. He first finished off the rest of his breakfast at a steady pace. Then, after wiping his mouth and sitting quietly for a moment, he finally turned toward Asato, who had been patiently waiting. Joining the Demon Slayer Corps, what benefits do I get out of it? Benefits? Takeo's question caught Asato completely off guard. He opened his mouth, but for a long moment, nothing came out. Benefits? Well, there was the Nichiren sword they issued. And free rest and recovery at Wisteria houses. Plus the Corps uniform, which could block most ordinary blades. But none of that really sounded like benefits. If anything, joining the Demon Slayer Corps meant risking your life in battle against demons, with death lurking around every corner. Asato racked his brain for an answer, but came up empty. Seeing his expression, Takeo realized he'd asked the wrong question. He quickly corrected himself. Sorry, that was the wrong question. What I meant was, if I join the Corps, I'll be able to learn your breathing technique, the full version, right? Exactly. Breathing techniques are a requirement for all members of the Corps. Once you're in, you can choose to train in any breathing style, any of them. Asato sounded almost desperate, blurting out that answer like he was afraid Takeo might change his mind and run off. But what surprised him most was that after hearing that, Takeo simply nodded without hesitation. All right. I'll join. Hey. What's wrong? Didn't you want me to join? Takeo smiled as he sipped his post-breakfast tea, looking calmly at Asato. Asato was stunned for a moment before chuckling helplessly. Yeah, that's true. I just didn't expect you to agree so quickly. Joining the Demon Slayer Corps means fighting demons, you know. Like the one you encountered that night. You'll be seeing a lot more of those. Isn't that a good thing? Hey. Asato froze again at Takeo's response. Takeo took another sip of tea and spoke in a calm, almost indifferent tone. Well. I think I used to have a happy family. Think? What do you mean? I mean, I'm not entirely sure. I've forgotten a lot of things, but I'll never forget the smell of blood when I woke up. I'll never forget the family members who were sleeping beside me. I may not know exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure my family was killed by a demon. So, even if you hadn't invited me, I would have joined the Demon Slayer Corps anyway. Takeo's voice was soft, but the way he said it made it sound like he wasn't even talking about himself. But Asato chose to trust him. He stared silently at Takeo for a long moment before finally letting out a sigh. In that case, I've got no problem. After a pause, Asato added, actually, most people who join the Demon Slayer Corps carry a deep hatred for demons. To be honest, I thought you didn't. You looked like someone who had never seen a demon before, but now I really was seeing one for the first time. I just can't remember anything from before, that's all. Takeo smiled as he replied, and that smile made Asato unsure how to respond. The two of them sat in silence for a while. When the sun finally climbed to the top of the sky, Asato spoke again. Since you're willing to join the Demon Slayer Corps, I won't say anything more. Later, I'll give you a letter. You'll take that letter and deliver it to someone. Once you hand it over, he'll start teaching you a breathing technique. After you learn it, you'll participate in the final selection. If you pass, you'll officially become a demon slayer. Asato continued explaining who this person was. The Demon Slayer Corps had existed for hundreds of years. Over that time, it had developed a well-structured system for training new recruits. Once a suitable person was identified, they would be recommended and sent to a nearby cultivator. A cultivator was someone within the Corps responsible for training new members, a mentor who would guide them through the path to becoming a demon slayer. There were many cultivators within the Demon Slayer Corps, but the most famous were, of course, those who had once served as Hashura, the 9 pillars, before retiring peacefully from their positions. However, former Hashura who became cultivators were rare. Most new recruits were trained by ordinary cultivators. "But you're lucky you ran into me," Asato said suddenly, sounding quite pleased with himself. "I'm ranked as a sea-level slayer. I once worked alongside a Hashura and made it out alive. The letter I'm giving you is for that Hashura. He's still an active pillar, but he should be willing to help find the right cultivator for you. After all, you're far too talented to waste." Within the Demon Slayer Corps, the hierarchy was structured as follows: at the top was the Oi Akata-sama, the master, followed by the 9 Hashura, and beneath them were the regular Corps members. Ordinary demon slayers were further divided into 10 ranks. Mizunoto, Mizuno, Kanoto, Kanu, Tsuchinoto, Tsuchino, Hinoto, Hano, Kainato, Kino. From lowest to highest. The higher the rank, the stronger and more experienced the slayer. Asato Yoshiro was currently at the Tsuchino, C rank, level. Thanks to surviving a mission with a Hashura in the past, he now held the privilege of recommending recruits directly to a pillar. And now, he was using that privilege to recommend Takeo for breathing technique training under the guidance of a pillar-approved cultivator. Takeo quietly committed everything Asato had said to memory. But as he reflected on it all, his gaze dropped to the wounds on his body, now nearly healed, and he suddenly fell silent. "Asato-san," Takeo asked softly after a pause, "you've noticed my body, haven't you?" "Ah, you mean your rapid healing ability?" Asato replied. "Yeah, I noticed. Honestly, I was startled the first time I saw it. I even thought you might be a demon. But demons can't survive under sunlight, so there's nothing to worry about. No one will think you're one. I even mentioned that in the recommendation letter." "That's it." Takeo looked at him in disbelief, stunned by how casually Asato brushed it off. "What else should it be?" Asato laughed. "As long as you're not a demon, it doesn't matter even if your regeneration is just like one's. Actually, it's even better, it means you're not going to die easily. You're definitely someone who can become a Hashura." To the Demon Slayer Corps, what mattered most was simple: as long as you were human and not a flesh-eating demon, you could be trusted. So what if you had a superhuman healing factor? Compared to a real demon, someone who stayed unconscious for 2 days before recovering was still basically human. It wasn't like there weren't any Hashiras with demi-human abilities. All Asato cared about was whether Takeo was a demon. And since he wasn't, there were no problems at all. Listening to Asato, Takeo felt like he understood this world just a bit better. It seemed the Demon Slayer Corps really did harbor an intense hatred for demons, but conversely, as long as someone wasn't a demon and was willing to slay them, it was incredibly easy to earn the Corps' trust. Because of that, Takeo didn't need to deliberately hide his unique physical condition. No one in the Demon Slayer Corps would care about it. With that realization, Takeo felt a little more at ease. He held the letter Asato had written for him and finally asked with curiosity. "Asato-san, who's the Hashura you're recommending me to?" "It's Rengoku Kyojuro-sama," Asato replied, his tone filled with reverence for the man. "He's the current flame Hashura, a master of the flame-breathing technique that can burn through anything. Even among the Hashura, he's incredibly powerful. With his help, I'm sure he'll find you the perfect cultivator." Asato had absolute faith in that. Chapter 13, Rengoku Household. Rengoku Kyojuro, the current flame Hashura of the Demon Slayer Corps. It was said that the Rengoku family had long been a mainstay of the Corps, one of its enduring lineages. Countless flame Hashura had emerged from their bloodline. The current flame Hashura, Kyojuro, and the former flame Hashura, Shinjiro, were both members of this distinguished family. It was truly a household rooted in the art of demon slaying. The Rengoku family was also responsible for the region encompassing Tokyo, which happened to be quite close to where Asato and Takeo were currently located. That was why Asato had recommended Takeo to the Rengoku household. Since he had already decided to join the Demon Slayer Corps, Takeo didn't hesitate for long. Once he had recovered, he set out immediately for the Rengoku residence. Before leaving, he made sure to bid farewell to the wealthy merchant and even taught the little boy a few basics of swordsmanship. Only after that did he part ways with Yoshizuru Asato and begin his journey to meet the Rengoku family. Asato did not accompany him. Since he hadn't been seriously injured, he still had to continue with his demon-slaying missions. The Demon Slayer Corps didn't have many members to begin with, and with so many powerful demons still roaming the land, their forces were perpetually stretched thin. Every demon slayer was expected to work as though they were two people instead of one. As long as they weren't wounded, Corps members were almost always engaged in the relentless fight against demons, until the day they died. This was what Yoshizuru Asato had told Takeo, and it revealed, in no uncertain terms, just how brutal this world truly was. In the shadows, far from the eyes of ordinary people, the Demon Slayer Corps had been locked in a deadly war with demons for hundreds of years. No one could even guess how many lives had been lost in the process, all to maintain the illusion of peace in the world. This was nothing like the somewhat peaceful anime world Takeo had originally imagined. This was a world steeped in cruelty. No wonder Kaiba kept ranting about something called Hashura Slayer. After learning from Masato what the Hashura were, and what demons really were, Takeo finally began to understand what his college roommate, Kaiba, had meant when he used that nickname Hashura Slayer. The pinnacle of the Demon Slayer Corps was the 9 Hashura. And for the series to earn a nickname like Hashura Slayer, it could only mean that, in the end, the Hashura were all killed. Maybe 1 or 2 survived, but most of them must have died. Otherwise, no one would have come up with such a grim nickname. Even the powerful Hashura would eventually fall. This world was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Because of that, Takeo knew he had to master a complete breathing technique as soon as possible, and obtain a Nichiren sword capable of killing demons. Only then would he have even the slightest chance of surviving. On the way to the Rengoku residence, Takeo didn't encounter any unexpected trouble. There were occasional rumors about demons, but they were all vague and unfounded, nothing concrete enough to think about. So, Takeo didn't pay them much attention. It took him about half a month, but he finally stepped onto the Rengoku family's land. Whoa, they're rich, hey! The Rengoku estate was located in the Ebara district, Tokyo Prefecture. The area was filled with grand, impressive buildings, just like the kind of residences you'd see in historical dramas, the homes of powerful and influential families. As he walked through the area, Takeo felt like he'd stepped into an ancient palace. Damn! This should be the Rengoku estate, it's huge. A/N, that's what she s anyways. Standing in front of the gate, Takeo couldn't help but mutter in awe. Compared to the modest 70 square meter house he had first woken up in, the mansion before him felt unimaginably vast. In both his past life and this one, this was the first time Takeo had ever set foot in a place like this. After taking a moment to collect himself, Takeo finally remembered why he was here. He turned his gaze toward the wide-open gate of the Rengoku estate, eyes scanning the grounds until they landed on a boy sweeping the courtyard. The boy looked to be around Takeo's age. He had a head of bright orange hair, like flames, with red streaks at the tips. It didn't look like the kind of hair a normal human would have. Then again, with his own fiery red hair, Takeo probably wasn't in any position to judge. Seeing that flame-like hair, Takeo immediately assumed the boy must be from the Rengoku family. He had heard that all members of the Rengoku bloodline shared that distinctive hair color. With that thought in mind, Takeo stepped forward and lightly knocked on the open gate, calling out to the child sweeping inside. Excuse me, is this the Rengoku residence? The boy paused and looked up, his eyes the same fiery hue as his hair, gazing at Takeo with a puzzled expression. Yes, this is indeed the Rengoku household. May I ask who you are? The boy spoke politely, using formal language. His courteous manner helped put Takeo at ease. It didn't seem like the Rengoku family carried the arrogance often associated with noble houses. Hello, I'm a Demon Slayer Corps recruit who was recommended to come here in search of a cultivator. My name is Kamado Takeo, and this is my letter of recommendation. Takeo responded just as politely, offering the introduction letter that Yoshizuru Asato had given him to the boy in front of him. He made sure not to be dismissive just because the other person was a child. After all, Takeo himself didn't exactly look like an adult either. When the Rengoku boy saw the letter of introduction in Takeo's hand, his eyes widened in shock. He took the letter and looked Takeo up and down in disbelief, glancing between the letter and Takeo several times. What? A Demon Slayer Corps recruit? But you look so young. Ah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude, it's just that. Realizing his words were impolite, the boy quickly waved his hands in a flustered apology. Takeo offered a gentle smile and shook his head, unbothered. It's all right. I do look young, but I wasn't lying, I really was recommended as a core recruit. I see. In that case, please come inside and have a seat. I'll go inform my brother right away. The boy ushered Takeo into the house, then hurriedly ran off deeper inside. Not long after, he returned now carrying a tray of tea. He placed it down as he spoke. Luckily, my brother is home right now. If he weren't, you might have had to wait quite a while. Oh sorry. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Rengoku Senjuro, the second son of the Rengoku family. Kamado Takeo. Takeo repeated his name once more. Kamado-san, you really do look young. After handing Takeo his tea, Senjuro hesitantly asked a question. Takeo didn't hide anything. I'm 12 years old. What? That means we're the same age. Senjuro couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Takeo didn't respond, he simply sipped his tea calmly. He said he was 12, but honestly, that was just an estimate. Takeo didn't actually know this body's real age. Without his original memories, and with Grandpa Saburo only vaguely familiar with the Kamado family's circumstances, no one could recall exactly how old the Kamado children had been. So Takeo could only rely on how others perceived him, along with his current physical development, to roughly gauge his age. He figured whatever his actual age was, it probably wasn't far off from his guess. Then, Takeo-san, what made you want to? Senjuro, still astonished, was about to ask another question. But before Senjuro could finish his question, a rough voice suddenly cut in. Where'd this brat come from? A strong stench of alcohol hit Takeo's nose almost immediately. He rubbed his nose, trying to clear it, then turned toward the doorway. A supersized Senjuro? That was the first admittedly rude thought that flashed through Takeo's mind. But to be fair, the man really did look like a grown-up version of Senjuro. A drunk, middle-aged version at that. And judging by his appearance, even without Senjuro's explanation, Takeo could already guess who he was. There were said to be very few direct descendants left in the Rengoku family. Aside from the current flame Hashura, Rengoku Kyojuro, the only one who could match this description was likely the former flame Hashura Rengoku Shinjuro. Takeo just hadn't expected the former flame Hashura to be a drunkard. That part had definitely caught him off guard. Chapter 14, Former Flame Hashura. Father. The way Senjuro addressed the man confirmed Takeo's suspicion. This drunken man really was the former flame Hashura Rengoku Shinjuro. Since the man had once held the title of Hashura, proper respect was still due. With that in mind, Takeo respectfully bowed and said, Are you Rengoku Shinjuro-san? I'm Kamado Takeo. I came here by recommendation to seek a cultivator. Get lost. Shinjuro cut him off bluntly. Drinking heavily, he spoke with open hostility, just some snot-nosed brat, and you think you can join the Demon Slayer Corps? Don't kid yourself. Father. You're drunk. Kamado-san came here to see my brother. Please, go back inside. Seeing how tense the atmosphere had become, Senjuro quickly stepped forward to defuse the situation. But Shinjuro wasn't having any of it. He roughly shoved Senjuro aside and barked. You little brat, are you saying I'm inferior to Kyojuro? I didn't mean that at all. You, that brat, even Kyojuro. You're all just talentless nobodies. And you want to join the Demon Slayer Corps? Stop dreaming. Go home and sleep it off. As he spoke, Shinjuro took another swig from his sake bottle, the stench of alcohol filling the room. Takeo, who had been silently observing from the side, looked visibly displeased. It wasn't Shinjuro's words that bothered him, it was his actions. Seeing Senjuro thrown to the ground, Takeo's expression turned cold. He stood up and said firmly. Talentless nobodies? I'll have to disagree with that. Let's set aside Kyojuro-san, who became a Hashura. I personally mastered a breathing technique in less than half a quarter of an hour and used it to kill a demon on the spot. Is that something a nobody could do? What did you say, you brat? Shinjuro paused for a moment, stunned by Takeo's claim. Then he stepped forward, sloshing his sake bottle angrily as he shouted. Don't spout nonsense. Mastered a breathing technique in under 15 minutes? Who do you think you are, the founder of the original breathing styles? I have no interest in arguing with a drunk. Everything about my situation is written in the letter of recommendation. And for the record, that letter is meant for Kyojuro-sama, not for you. Faced with someone openly hostile toward him, Takeo saw no reason to remain polite. His tone was calm, but the way he spoke made it sound like a thinly veiled mockery as he addressed the man, former flame Hashura. Ah! Senjuro froze when he heard that. The next moment, he rushed forward and grabbed Shinjiro's arm, trying desperately to stop him. But Senjiro's strength was too feeble, he had no way of holding Shinjiro back. In a blur, Shinjiro closed the distance between them and grabbed Takeo by the collar, yanking him forward until their faces were inches apart. You little brat, what's that supposed to mean? Are you looking down on me? Father! Kamado-san didn't mean it that way, please. I did mean it that way. Though. Startled by Shinjiro's sudden speed, Takeo stood his ground and stared back without flinching, speaking each word with deliberate clarity. I do look down on a drunk who beats his child and does nothing but drown in alcohol. Bang! The moment the words left Takeo's mouth, Shinjiro's fist came crashing down on his forehead. Shinjiro's strength was considerable. Even if he seemed to be holding back somewhat, the blow was still enough to leave Takeo dizzy and seeing stars. Father! Please, stop! Seeing Shinjiro raise his hand, Senjuro panicked and tried to intervene. But before he could say more, Takeo's indignant voice rang out. What's wrong, former flame Hashura? Did I hit a nerve? Is that why you want to lash out? How disgraceful! You little brat! If you really need to vent your anger on a kid who's not even a full-fledged demon slayer yet, go ahead. I just wonder if word of this gets out, what will it do to the Rengoku family's reputation? Even with Shinjiro's hand clamped around him, Takeo showed no intention of backing down or apologizing. On the contrary, he poured more fuel on the fire. But it had to be said, his words hit the mark. Shinjiro's raised fist froze in midair, suspended for several seconds without coming down. He glared viciously at Takeo, still held tightly in his grip, then suddenly, a wide, twisted grin spread across his face. Very good, you little brat. You've succeeded in pissing me off. Thud. Shinjiro threw Takeo to the ground, then looked down at him and said, You just said, you mastered a breathing technique in under 15 minutes. That's right. Is there a problem with that? Takeo stood up from the floor, lifting his head to meet Shinjiro's gaze without backing down. Shinjiro turned to Senjuro and said, Teach him flame breathing. I'll give you 30 minutes. If he can use flame breathing to defeat me after that, then forget Kyojuro, I'll personally train him myself. What? Father, that's... Silence, Senjuro. Teach him flame breathing. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Not giving Senjuro any chance to argue, Shinjiro barked his command, then turned and walked away, sake bottle in hand. Leaving only Senjuro and Takeo staring at each other in stunned silence. Nearly a full minute passed before Senjuro snapped out of it, panic rising in his voice. This is bad. 30 minutes. Even though my brother is nearby, there's no way he can make it back in time. Kamado-san, you should just leave for now. Why would I leave? Takeo looked at Senjuro. Didn't he say I have 30 minutes to learn flame breathing? You just start teaching me, everything else can come later. Kamado-san, please don't joke like that. 30 minutes. There's no way anyone could learn a breathing technique in just 30 minutes. I've been training for so long and I still haven't mastered it. Senjuro spoke with urgency, unable to believe that Takeo could possibly grasp flame breathing in such a short amount of time. Even if Takeo was a recommended recruit of the Demon Slayer Corps. How would we know unless we try? Takeo shot the question back. No. Even if you could learn flame breathing, you wouldn't stand a chance against my father. He's a former flame Hashura. Even without a sword, you wouldn't be able to beat him. He'll kill you. It's fine, Senjuro. Just teach me what you know. I'll figure out the rest myself. Seeing that Senjuro was still wasting time, Takeo couldn't help but press him. And just a reminder, it's already been nearly 5 minutes. Senjuro froze, staring at Takeo in a daze. But seeing the unwavering resolve in Takeo's eyes, he knew he had no other choice. Reluctantly, he began teaching Takeo the basics of the flame breathing forms that he knew. Senjuro had learned flame breathing before, after all, it was the Rengoku family's inherited breathing technique. But Senjuro himself had never been able to use it because, unlike his older brother Kyojuro, he lacked the talent necessary to become a demon slayer. Even so, he had a deep understanding of the theoretical foundations of flame breathing. Precisely because he had struggled to learn it, Senjuro had read through the secret flame breathing scrolls countless times. Now, all that effort was becoming nourishment for someone else, a foundation to cultivate a new swordsman. Over 40 minutes later, Shinjiro finally appeared again at the doorway. The smell of alcohol on him was even stronger than before. He had clearly downed quite a bit more sake. Staggering slightly, he gave off a sense of drunken frailty. And yet, in Takeo's eyes, Shinjiro now seemed even more dangerous than earlier. "All right, brat. Time's up. Let's see whether you were just running your mouth." Shinjiro looked at Takeo with a fierce, menacing grin that made it clear he wasn't here to play nice. Chapter 15, The Wise and Gentle Voice. "Okay. Yeah. It'll be a piece of cake. Or so did I thought. I'm screwed. I really talked too fucking big, didn't I?" Standing in front of Shinjiro with a bamboo practice sword in hand, Takeo appeared calm on the outside, but inside, cold sweat was pouring down. At first, he had thought that since he'd managed to learn wind breathing in such a short time, learning flame breathing just as quickly shouldn't be too difficult. Especially since Shinjiro had given him a full 30 minutes, even more than that, in fact. It was a safe environment, with the complete breathing technique provided no fear of demons attacking at any moment, no pressure to force himself to grasp an incomplete style. By all accounts, these were ideal conditions for training. And yet, more than half an hour had passed, and Takeo still hadn't mastered flame breathing. No, allow him to defend himself just a little. Can someone explain why the breathing patterns between different breathing techniques could be so different? Weren't they all derived from the same foundational breathing method? Why, after learning wind breathing, was it this hard to switch to flame breathing? It wasn't that Takeo couldn't learn it, he'd already memorized the theory behind flame breathing. If he hadn't already learned wind breathing, he might have picked up flame breathing fairly quickly. But the problem was that during his travels, he had already fully internalized wind breathing. Its rhythm and flow had become second nature to his body. And because of that, forcibly switching to the flame breathing pattern would take far more time than he had. Half an hour just wasn't enough. Forget 30 minutes. Even if Takeo had half a day, he probably still wouldn't have pulled it off. Now he was really screwed. What's wrong? Not planning to attack? Or is it that you couldn't master flame breathing? Shinjiro stood casually, one hand holding his sake bottle and the other holding a bamboo practice sword. To Takeo, the man looked full of openings, but the moment he seriously considered launching an attack, he couldn't find a single angle worth exploiting. At the end of the day, this drunken bastard was still a former flame Hashura, someone who had retired from the Corps while still in one piece. That fact alone was proof of his strength. Only now did Takeo truly realize how brainless it had been to accept this challenge to agree to defeat Shinjiro using flame breathing. His body was now younger, and it was starting to affect his mind too. Was he really this reckless before? It dawned on him his mindset was beginning to match the age of his body. Maybe it was the hormones. But now wasn't the time to be thinking about that. Gripping the bamboo sword tightly with both hands, Takeo, already in too deep to back out, locked eyes with Shinjiro, his gaze resolute, and shouted. "In that case, here I come." Boom. Takeo gathered his breathing technique, focusing it into his legs. In an instant, his speed exploded past his limits. He shot toward Shinjiro like a sudden gust of wind. A raging vortex of wind spiraled behind him, tearing through the solid ground. A powerful shockwave erupted from the tip of Takeo's bamboo sword, blasting straight toward Shinjiro. Wind breathing, first form, dust whirlwind cutter. Back when Yoshizuru Asato had accompanied Takeo to the Wisteria house for recovery, he had taught him the complete wind breathing style. Because of that, Takeo could now unleash the first form of wind breathing with ease. Currently, he had mastered the first 6 forms of wind breathing and could use them fluidly in combat. Against an enemy, he would instinctively resort to wind breathing techniques. If he were to face that water demon on the boat again now, Takeo was certain he could kill it with ease. This was the strength he possessed now. Sure, it still wasn't enough to surpass a former flame Hashura, but it was definitely stronger than Yoshizuru Asato. Roughly 3 times as strong, in fact a full 3 Asatos of strength. Yoshizuru Asato has now been reduced to a unit of measurement XD. And yet, the strike that could have cleanly taken the head off a water demon did nothing to Shinjiro. With just a single move, one strike, Shinjiro easily tore through Takeo's wind and landed a precise blow on his wrist. Bam! Takeo winced in pain and nearly dropped his sword, but in the next second, he gripped it even tighter, raised it high, changed his breathing form, and unleashed a rising slash filled with spiraling wind blades. Wind breathing, 6th form, Black Wind Mountain Mist. But even this was effortlessly countered. Shinjiro reversed his grip and broke through the attack with a single motion. Pathetic. Wham! Shinjiro, now visibly angry, kicked Takeo hard in the waist and abdomen, sending him flying. But he didn't follow up. He simply stood in place, shouting in fury. What are you even using? Is that flame breathing? I asked you, where is your flame breathing? If I could use flame breathing, I would have done it already, you damn drunken bastard. Takeo adjusted his posture in midair and landed firmly on the ground, gritting his teeth as he mentally cursed Shinjiro. Unfortunately, that was one thought he couldn't say out loud. He was the one who said he'd master flame breathing in a short time, so if he tried to make excuses now, it would only make him look like a fool. That stubborn pride unique to young boys began to flare within Takeo, and once it did, he couldn't bring himself to admit defeat. So even if he couldn't use flame breathing yet, Takeo still wanted to see if he could defeat Shinjiro through sheer will. Without saying a word, Takeo continued to charge at Shinjiro. His eyes saw nothing but Shinjiro. His entire focus was on defeating the man in front of him. But the difference in their strength was simply too great. Even swaying unsteadily, reeking of alcohol, and looking like he could barely stand, Shinjiro was still a Hashura. A former Hashura, yes, but a Hashura nonetheless. His strength was overwhelming. The speed of his bamboo sword was impossible to track. Often, before Takeo could even register what was happening, his hands had already been struck. Shinjiro seemed to be deliberately targeting Takeo's wrists, trying to make him drop his sword, but the more he did, the more determined Takeo became to hold on. To a swordsman, letting go of your blade was no different from surrendering. Where's your talent? What about all that big talk you spouted earlier? Where's your flame breathing now? Shinjiro roared furiously as he struck Takeo's wrist again, then sent him flying with another kick. That kick landed hard. Takeo felt as though his stomach had been split open. He couldn't get back up immediately. Watching from the side, Shinjiro couldn't hold back any longer and shouted. That's enough. Father, you know perfectly well that a swordsman who's already mastered one breathing technique can't just learn another in such a short time. Shut up! Shinjiro roared at Shinjiro, then stormed over to Takeo, raising his bamboo sword high overhead. If you have no talent, admit it. A useless brat like you would be better off getting out of the Demon Slayer Corps while you still can. With that, Shinjiro brought the bamboo sword crashing down toward Takeo's head. Had the strike landed cleanly, an ordinary person would likely have suffered a concussion. Even a swordsman trained in breathing techniques would probably be bedridden for days. Takeo tried to dodge, but Shinjiro's swing was too fast. In the blink of an eye, the bamboo sword was already about to strike his head. Takeo! Breathe! Time seemed to slow. In that suspended moment, Takeo heard a familiar male voice whisper in his ear. Before his eyes, like a fleeting vision, he saw the silhouette of a man who looked somewhat like him but older and more mature. That figure appeared weak and emaciated, all skin and bones. He sat just outside the room, watching Takeo holding something in his hands, smiling gently as he spoke in a soft voice. Breathing is the foundation of everything, Takeo. You must remember that. Breathing. A strange, graceful dance flickered across Takeo's vision. And just after that dance ended, he once again saw the bamboo sword about to crash down on his head. How much time had passed just now? A moment? A second? No, maybe not even the blink of an eye. But somehow unexplainably Takeo felt like something had just clicked inside him. His breathing suddenly changed. A searing flow of heat surged through his body, like a blaze ignited from his lungs, spreading out through every fiber of his being. Whoosh! Takeo narrowly dodged the bamboo sword, missing his head by mere millimeters. The thunderous impact as the bamboo struck the ground was deafening, but Takeo ignored it completely. Flames curled around his own bamboo sword, a scorching heat that seemed hot enough to ignite the very air itself surged upward as he swung it at Shinjiro. Blazing firelight burst forth before both Shinjiro and Senjiro's eyes. Flame breathing, second form, rising scorching sun. In that moment Takeo unleashed it. Chapter 16, Become My Adopted Son, Boy. No one could learn two breathing techniques in a short amount of time. As the former flame Hashura, Shinjiro knew this better than anyone. Breathing techniques were methods that enhanced the body, but aside from the original form, sun breathing, All other styles differed in how they were used. Each had different breathing patterns, different combat forms. Once the body became accustomed to one breathing technique, unless the other being used was the original sun breathing, it was virtually impossible to switch techniques freely. Forcibly switching would throw one's breathing into chaos, placing a tremendous burden on the body. This was why every swordsman only ever mastered one breathing technique. Even those who developed a second typically only did so by evolving it from their foundational breathing, creating a new, personalized style derived from their core. Shinjiro understood this truth. And he could also see that this brat in front of him had indeed mastered some form of breathing technique. Though not yet fully refined, the boy was unmistakably using it. That alone made him qualified to join the Demon Slayer Corps. In fact, there was no need to train him further. He could head straight for the final selection and likely pass without issue. And yet, Shinjiro still chose to crush the boy's spirit to make him give up before it was too late. After all, what did it matter if he had mastered a breathing technique? In the end, he'd die anyway, either at the hands of a demon or from illness. A kid like this, even with a bit of talent, how long could he really survive? He'd be better off leaving the Demon Slayer Corps and living an ordinary life. That was why Shinjiro made things difficult for him. Of course, maybe, just maybe, there was a little bit of personal emotion mixed in. Fine, a lot. But the truth was, Shinjiro simply didn't want to see a kid who looked about the same age as his own youngest son walk into the brutal world of demon slaying. Not being able to use flame breathing, that was normal. Being unable to reverse the flow of one's breathing, that was normal too. At least for ordinary people, it was impossible. And if this red-haired brat couldn't do it either, then he didn't have the so-called talent Shinjiro spoke of. And if he had no talent, then he wasn't suited to join the Demon Slayer Corps. It was better for him to quit early. That was what Shinjiro thought as he brought his bamboo sword down toward the boy lying on the ground. With this strike, this pointless farce would come to an end. The brat would likely be bedridden for a few days and afterward, give up on joining the Corps entirely. With his strong body, he could become a good citizen, become wealthy, love freely, and marry the love of his life, lead a happy life as a normal person and not get tangled in this desperate, dark mess this world truly was. That's also what he wanted for his son Senjiro. But Shinjiro's prediction had gone off track. Even though the boy was already down on the ground, even though his breathing was shallow and he looked like he had no strength left to fight at the final, critical moment, an intense wave of heat suddenly erupted from his body. And because it was flame breathing, Shinjiro recognized it immediately. He knew exactly what technique the brat had just used. Wind had turned into flame. The raging wind had transformed into blazing fire. So unbelievable was the sight before him that Shinjiro froze in place. Just for a second, only for that briefest instant, but in that time, searing flames split the air, shattered the bamboo sword, and reached Shinjiro's jaw. But the strike never landed. Because the boy's bamboo sword, unable to withstand the strain of switching between two breathing techniques, had splintered, breaking apart inch by inch until only the hilt remained, trembling as it pointed at Shinjiro. The scene fell silent. Takeo didn't speak. He couldn't. He was doing everything he could just to endure the pain caused by forcibly shifting his breathing style. A moment later, Senjiro's voice broke the silence. Did you win? Ha, ha. I managed to use flame breathing. Takeo remained in his upward slashing stance, and calmly spoke to Shinjiro. Shinjiro looked down at the broken bamboo sword in his hand, then back at the boy before him who, despite being in obvious agony, still stood tall without retreating. His mouth twitched slightly. In the end, he said nothing. He tossed aside the bamboo sword, turned around, and left. As he walked away, he still swayed like a drunk, as if he might collapse at any moment. Ugh! Ha, ha! Only after Shinjiro left did Takeo finally give in, falling to one knee. Clutching his chest, he gasped for breath. An overwhelming tightness and discomfort, like a massive stitch in his side, nearly made him lose consciousness. Senjiro quickly rushed to his side, worried. Are you all right? Kamado-san. Breathe. Boy. A thunderous voice suddenly rang out beside them, making both Senjiro and Takeo jolt in surprise. The shout nearly sent Takeo into full blackout. Before Takeo could even see who had spoken, he felt a warm hand press against his back. Then, from the side, a medium-sized version of Senjiro's face suddenly popped into view, wearing a wide smile. His voice boomed like a temple bell as he shouted. Focus on your breathing. Steady your rhythm. Channel your breathing to ease the pain from the shift in technique. It'll help a lot. Huff. Ugh. So loud, my ears are going to explode. The suddenly appearing medium-sized Senjuro shouted every single word like he was delivering a war speech. His voice was so thunderous it made Takeo's head spin, but even so, Takeo instinctively followed the instructions and began practicing total concentration breathing as directed. Yes. Just like that. The booming voice praised, clearly noticing the shift in Takeo's breathing flow. Following the man's guidance, Takeo gradually began to feel better. After some time, the pain subsided enough for him to move again. He raised his head to look at the medium-sized Senjuro next to him and was about to ask who he was when the nearby small Senjuro, "Wait, no, just regular Senjuro," cried out in delight. "Ani-san. When did you get back?" For some reason, even Senjuro's voice had gotten louder only to be drowned out by the even louder voice of medium Sen-no, Rengoku Kyojuro himself. "While this red-haired boy was battling our father. So you were here from the very beginning. Why didn't you stop them?" Senjuro couldn't help but shout in exasperation. "Because I saw the resolve in this young man's heart," boomed medium-sized Senjuro in response. Then he placed a firm hand on the boy on Takeo's shoulder and declared in an even louder voice. "Become my adopted son, boy." "Hey. Excuse me, what exactly is the connection between seeing my resolve and becoming your adopted son? Did I miss something here?" Takeo was completely thrown off by the sheer leap in logic packed into that one sentence, but he quickly realized who this medium-sized Senjuro, this man who looked so much like Senjuro, really was. No doubt about it. This had to be the current flame Hashura Rengoku Kyojuro. First impression? Well, let's just say he's definitely a man of strong personality. "Ani-san, there you go again. I'm sorry, Kamado-san, my brother's ideas are kind of strange sometimes. And no, it's fine. That said, adopted son means, what, exactly?" Hearing Senjuro's apology, Takeo responded offhandedly and then asked what exactly Rengoku Kyojuro had meant by adopted son. From the sound of it, it seemed like he was trying to take him in as some sort of godson. But surely no one would go around picking up random kids as godchildren, right? So maybe Takeo had misunderstood. By adopted son, he means becoming his Tsugyuko, that is, the successor of a Hashura. Tsugyuko is basically the person meant to inherit their position. What my brother meant is that he wants you to become his student. Senjuro explained it simply, confirming that Takeo's assumption was wrong. Adopted son definitely didn't mean godson. But to be named as a Hashura's successor right off the bat, wasn't that a bit too rash? "So, boy. Become my adopted son." Kyojuro repeated his declaration at full volume. Takeo's eye twitched. Putting aside this flame Hashura's apparent habit of offering people inheritance-level mentorship at first sight, what Takeo really didn't understand was, why does he have to yell every single sentence? My ears are going to explode, damn it. Chapter 17, Takeo's nightmare began. A freshly brewed cup of tea, still steaming in the cold air, was placed in front of Takeo. "Please enjoy some tea, Kamado-san." Senjuro, who had once again brewed the tea, set the tray down and leaned in slightly to explain in a hushed tone. "Sorry. My brother injured his ears a while ago, so he tends to speak really loudly." "I see. Oh. Senjuro's tea is delicious." As the two whispered to each other, Kyojuro once again boomed with enthusiastic praise. Senjuro gave an awkward but polite smile, then turned back to Takeo and said, "So, that's how he is. I hope you won't mind." "It's fine," Takeo replied, waving it off. He then turned his attention to Kyojuro and handed him the letter that Yoshizuru Asato had given him. "You're the Flame Hashura of the Demon Slayer Corps, right? This is a letter of recommendation from Yoshizuru Asato. He said you would help me find a suitable cultivator." "Not necessary." Without even glancing at the letter, Kyojuro responded in his usual booming voice, "You have already mastered wind breathing and even learned flame breathing. Therefore, you do not need a cultivator. You already qualify to participate in the final selection." "Is that so?" "That's great to hear." Because of Kyojuro's volume, Takeo found his own voice unconsciously rising as well. Kyojuro continued loudly, "But if you become my adopted son, I will train you rigorously. Simply knowing standard breathing techniques is far from enough." I don't believe I ever agreed to become your adopted son." Seeing how eager Kyojuro seemed to make him his successor, Takeo couldn't help feeling a bit speechless. Sure, his goal was to join the Demon Slayer Corps, and if he could eventually reach the top and become one of the Hashura, that would be ideal. But becoming someone's designated heir, just sounded like a hassle. Still, he had learned the Rengoku family's inherited flame breathing, after all. Is that so? What a shame. Just as Takeo was thinking that, he heard Kyojuro respond sounding as though he had given up immediately. Wait, what? At least try to be a little more persistent. If you'd pushed a bit harder, I might have agreed, you know? Forget it. No point trying to keep up with this guy's pace. Takeo gave up trying to follow Kyojuro's train of thought. Instead, he recalled the term standard breathing techniques that Kyojuro had mentioned earlier, and couldn't help but ask. Kyojuro-san, are there breathing techniques that aren't standard? Nope. Came the immediate, thunderous reply. There aren't. But just now, you said. I meant personalized breathing techniques. Kyojuro declared loudly, then launched into an explanation. Flame, water, wind, stone, and thunder, these are the 5 fundamental breathing styles. But beyond those, there are breathing techniques derived from them, unique styles developed by individual swordsmen. For example, love breathing was derived from flame breathing. Sound breathing evolved from thunder breathing. And so on. So that's it, by standard breathing techniques, he meant the 5 core styles, and the non-standard ones are those that branch off from the fundamentals and are refined into something more personal. Listening to Kyojuro's examples, Takeo nodded in understanding. Though he couldn't help wondering why did he specifically choose love and sound breathing as examples? While Takeo was still wondering about it, Senjuro spoke up, the current love Hashura, Kanroji Mitsurai-san, who uses love breathing, was once my brother's Tsugyoko. The one who uses sound breathing is the current sound Hashura, Dozui Tenjin-sama. They're both my brother's colleagues. Ah, so that's why, since they're his fellow Hashura, he used them as examples. Exactly. Only by mastering a breathing technique that suits you best can you become stronger. You have great talent, so I know you'll succeed. Kyojuro loudly affirmed Takeo's potential. And it made sense. After all, someone who could master a breathing technique in a short period of time and even forcefully switch between 2 different styles without formal training was incredibly rare. So rare that no one would even question saying it was unheard of. That alone was proof that Takeo had exceptional talent. If anyone could develop a personalized breathing technique of their own, it would be him. At least, that's probably what Kyojuro was thinking. But to Takeo, it just felt like Kyojuro was setting the bar way too high. After all, it hadn't even been 2 weeks since he first started learning breathing techniques. His ability to use wind breathing proficiently was only thanks to the foundation laid by Uncle Wolverine's 200 years of combat technique experience. As for his use of flame breathing, it was more of a spontaneous spark. He had heard a voice, seemingly out of nowhere, and instinctively shifted his breathing. It wasn't deliberate at all. In fact, the sensation had been so surreal that Takeo wasn't even sure he could replicate it again. And yet now, Kyojuro was telling him to create a breathing technique of his own. Honestly, Takeo didn't think of himself as a genius at all. That kind of thing, he just couldn't do it. But even if he couldn't, Takeo still made the decision to become Kyojuro's Tsugyoko. Because only by doing so would he receive Kyojuro's full instruction. Personal, all-encompassing guidance from a Hashura was something most Demon Slayer Corps members could only dream of. Takeo needed someone strong to teach him the fundamentals of breathing techniques. He was a latecomer to this art, his foundation was weak, and there were many areas where he needed extra help. And so, he decided to become Kyojuro's successor. Kyojuro seemed absolutely delighted. But he also said that, for now, he couldn't formally accept Takeo as his Tsugyoko because Takeo still wasn't an official member of the Demon Slayer Corps. That said, Kyojuro added that he would still train Takeo strictly, using the standards he would apply to a Tsugyoko. And so, Takeo's nightmare began. Breathe. Focus on your breathing. Why are you using your hands? You're human, not a beast. Swing your sword properly. Stop thinking you can just trade injuries. Your recovery speed might be far above average, but it's still not as fast as a demon's. What if you leave an opening because you're too badly injured? Value your life more. Spartan. This is Sparta. From morning till night, from basic physical training to sword combat practice. Takeo was training non-stop. And once Kyojuro learned about his abnormal regeneration, he tailored a training regimen that no normal person could possibly endure. It wasn't until then that Takeo heard from Senjuro that Kyojuro had actually taken on quite a few Tsugyuko in the past. But aside from the love Hashura, Kanroji Mitsurai, none of the others had been able to endure Kyojuro's grueling training. They had all quit and run away. Now, Takeo had officially become the longest-lasting Tsugyuko since Mitsurai. And upon hearing that, Takeo fully understood why the others had bolted. If he didn't have his rapid healing, if he didn't have old man Logan's centuries of combat experience and the battle-hardened instincts that came with it, if he didn't possess the mental fortitude that surpassed most modern humans, he would have run too. Absolutely. He would have bolted the very night Kyojuro started training him. And he never wanted to see Kyojuro again ever. Honestly, you couldn't expect a pampered modern person to survive this kind of Spartan death training. In fact, if it weren't for old man Logan's regenerative abilities, Takeo might have literally died from Kyojuro's regimen. Thank you, Uncle Logan. Thank you, regeneration. As the sun began to set, Takeo, resting in the courtyard, silently offered his heartfelt thanks to Uncle Logan, who was presumably watching from the afterlife. Though, to be fair, if not for those regeneration abilities, Kyojuro probably wouldn't have trained him like this in the first place. Is Rengoku-san home? While Takeo was taking a break, a pink-haired head suddenly peeked through the wide-open gate of the Rengoku estate. It was the head of a girl with long, sakura pink hair and soft green tips. Honestly, her hair looked even more unusual than the Rengoku family's trademark fiery color. She leaned slightly through the entrance, peering into the courtyard. Just as Takeo was about to step forward to ask, Senjuro came out of the house and called out to her with a bright smile. Mitsurai-ni-san, you're here. My brother's inside, please come in. With that, Senjuro revealed the girl's name. And Takeo immediately understood who she was. This was the current love Hashura of the Demon Slayer Corps, Kanroji Mitsurai. Chapter 18, Are They a Couple? The Flame Hashura and the Love Hashura were inside the house discussing official business. Since neither Senjuro nor Takeo were official members of the Demon Slayer Corps, they didn't go in. Instead, they waited outside for the conversation to end. But Takeo had fairly sharp hearing, and he could faintly catch parts of their conversation. It seemed, there was some kind of mission that required the Flame Hashura's attention. And since the Love Hashura happened to be nearby, she had come to deliver the details in person. My brother's rarely home. This has been his longest stay in a while. Senjuro, clearly aware that Kyojuro would be leaving again soon, quietly explained the situation to Takeo. As one of the Hashura, Kyojuro almost never had free time. If he wasn't slaying demons, he was on his way to slay demons. The only reason he'd come home this time was because he'd just finished eliminating a demon nearly as strong as one of the 12 Kizuki, and since the mission site was close by, he'd been granted a short leave. But even then, after just 3 days at home, he was already scheduled to head out again. After all, he was a Hashura, the very pillars of the Demon Slayer Corps. I know this might not be the right time to ask, but, what about my training? Takeo didn't particularly mind that Kyojuro was leaving, but what did concern him was that once Kyojuro was gone, he wouldn't have a sparring partner for combat training. Shinjiro didn't seem like the type to train anyone. That damn drunk had completely gone back on his word. He'd spent the past few days holed up in his room, drinking non-stop and refusing to come out. What happened to if you beat me using flame breathing, I'll personally train you. Stupid drunkard. Takeo was full of resentment toward Shinjiro and had no fondness for him whatsoever. That's why he much preferred to be trained by Kyojuro. As harsh as Kyojuro's training was, it was undeniably effective. Right now, Takeo felt like he could take on 5 Yoshizuru Asatos at once. 5 Asato level strength. You don't need to continue training anymore. Just as Takeo finished speaking, the door to the house opened. Kyojuro stepped out and said to him. You truly are talented. I've already taught you everything you need to know. You're fully qualified to participate in the final selection. That fast? But didn't you say I had to master a personalized breathing technique? Takeo looked at Kyojuro in surprise. Kyojuro, still wearing his trademark cheerful smile, declared loudly, that was the requirement for a Tsugyuko. You're not my Tsugyuko yet. Didn't you say I couldn't become your Tsugyuko until I officially joined the Demon Slayer Corps? Exactly. And now you're saying you won't hold me to those standards because I'm not your Tsugyuko. Precisely. I don't get it. I just don't get this man's logic. Even though Takeo felt like he'd slowly started to keep up with Kyojuro's way of thinking over the past few days, apparently he was still one step behind. At the very least, he had absolutely no idea what Kyojuro was trying to say right now. Just as he was about to give up asking, Kyojuro suddenly added, because you have great talent. Hey! You have incredible talent. And an enviable recovery ability. That's why I wanted to set higher expectations for you. If it's you, I'm certain you'll become a Hashura and quickly at that. So I had hoped you could create a personalized breathing technique before the final selection. But even if you don't manage to, that's perfectly fine. Becoming an official member of the Demon Slayer Corps and fighting demons directly will help you grow stronger. Kyojuro spoke to Takeo with genuine conviction. And finally, Takeo understood. Kyojuro did want to take him in as his Tsugyuko, and he did hope Takeo would one day create his own breathing technique. But more than that, he wanted Takeo to join the Demon Slayer Corps as soon as possible so they could stand side by side in battle. That was the hope and trust Kyojuro was placing in him. I understand. Now grasping what Kyojuro truly meant, Takeo replied seriously, in that case, I'll go participate in the final selection. As for developing his own breathing technique, Takeo honestly had no clue where to begin. But since his strength had already reached and possibly surpassed the base requirement, there was no point in delaying further. Takeo wanted a Nichiren sword of his own. Only with one could he inflict truly fatal wounds on demons. That meant becoming a full-fledged member of the Corps as soon as possible. Excellent. Then you'll set out tomorrow. After hearing Takeo's decision, Kyojuro suddenly spoke up. Takeo. Seeing Takeo frozen in confusion, the love Hashura, Kanroji Mitsurai, couldn't bear to watch and stepped in to explain. The final selection for this quarter is in 2 weeks. And the selection site, Mount Fujikazan, is a bit far from here. So it'd be best if you depart tomorrow to make it in time. Only 2 weeks left. That's way too soon. Only now did Takeo understand why Kyojuro had been in such a rush to push him toward the final selection. There just wasn't enough time. Ha ha ha. I completely forgot when the selection was being held. Kyojuro let out his usual hearty, cheerful laugh as he said it. You're a Hashura. You're the Flame Hashura. How do you forget something this important about your own organization? Takeo had an entire monologue of frustrated internal screaming but no way to let it out. The suffering was real. At his side, Kanroji Mitsurai gave him a sympathetic smile and said. Kyojuro-san is always like this. Once you become his Tsugyuko, you'll get used to it. Oh. I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Kanroji Mitsurai. Pleased to meet you. Kamado Takeo, pleased to meet you. After exchanging greetings with Kanroji Mitsurai, Takeo finally took a moment to observe the current love Hashura of the Demon Slayer Corps more closely. Her smile was bright and cheerful, much like Kyojuro's. No wonder she had once been his Tsugyuko, that trait was clearly something they shared. She looked energetic, and she didn't seem all that old, though one thing was especially attention-grabbing: her chest. Wait, why was her uniform open like that? A large portion of her chest was exposed. Was this a female-only version of the uniform? It didn't really match the serious tone of the Demon Slayer Corps, but honestly... Gulp. Approved by Takeo. Combined with her uniquely colored hair, she radiated a charm all her own, though that hair color must have stood out even more in this era. You're so young. Even younger than I was when I joined the Demon Slayer Corps. Youth is such a wonderful thing, makes it easier to find a sweetheart. After the introductions, for some reason, Mitsurai suddenly started sighing wistfully as she looked at Takeo. Takeo had no idea how to respond to that, so he just gave her a polite smile. When you don't know how to respond, just smile. At the very least, it'll never come off as rude. By the way. Kyojuro suddenly shouted. Well, to be fair, he always spoke in a shout, but this time it was even louder than usual. Takeo turned to look at him and heard Kyojuro say. To participate in the final selection, you'll need a suitable sword. As it happens, Mitsurai's practice sword from her final selection is still here. If you don't mind, you can use that one. Kyojuro-san still has my sword. Hearing this, Mitsurai looked genuinely surprised. Her cheeks even turned a bit red with embarrassment. Kyojuro replied, full of pride, of course. It was the sword used by my one and only Tsugyuko. There's no way I'd throw it away. Ah! That's so touching. Mitsurai's eyes sparkled as she looked at Kyojuro with admiration. Takeo, watching the exchange, couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the way she was looking at him. The Flame Hashura and the Love Hashura, wait a second, are they a couple or something? Chapter 19, A Nichiren Sword and Mount Fujikazan. As it turned out, the whole Flame Hashura x Love Hashura thing was just a misunderstanding on Takeo's part. On the way to retrieve the sword, Takeo learned that Mitsurai behaved like that with everyone, cheerful, friendly, energetic, and easily flustered. It wasn't something reserved just for Kyojuro. The little spark of gossip that had flared up in Takeo's heart quickly fizzled out. Makes sense. The Hashura were constantly out slaying demons, rarely gathered in one place. How would they even have time to form a relationship? Besides, this world is called Hashura Slayer. Just thinking about that suddenly made Takeo's mood a little heavy. If his guess about this world's plot was right, and the story really did end with nearly all the Hashura dying, then that passionate Flame Hashura, and that radiant, energetic Love Hashura would die too? It didn't feel real. Having never personally witnessed someone die in front of him, Takeo couldn't truly grasp the weight of death. Even if someone told him now that Kyojuro would die, that Mitsurai would die, he wouldn't feel much. Because it didn't feel real. Come to think of it, the closest Takeo had ever come to witnessing someone's death, was that time when the little troublemaker, Miura Ichiro, collapsed in a pool of blood. Back then, he remembered feeling furious. But once he realized Ichiro was actually okay, that anger quickly faded, replaced only by curiosity about that water demon. Maybe Takeo still hadn't fully integrated into this world. This is the one. Kyojuro's booming voice snapped Takeo out of his thoughts. Takeo looked up and saw Kyojuro holding out a Nichiren sword to him. The sword had a black scabbard. The handle was wrapped in soft sakura pink cloth, and the tsuba, the handguard, was a regular pentagon shape. When Takeo drew the blade, the silver-grey edge gleamed in the firelight. A Nichiren sword. The essential weapon of all Demon Slayer Corps members. It was said that Nichiren swords were forged from a special ore known as scarlet crimson iron sand and scarlet crimson ore, materials capable of absorbing sunlight and storing it within. As a result, the blade was extremely effective against demons. The moment one of these blades severed a demon's neck, no matter how powerful the demon was, it would be reduced to ashes. Just like a demon being exposed to direct sunlight. It was thanks to these swords that members of the Demon Slayer Corps were able to battle demons at all. Without a Nichiren sword, no weapon could inflict meaningful damage on a demon. That was exactly why Takeo had wanted to join the Demon Slayer Corps, to obtain a Nichiren sword of his own. Take that sword and head to the final selection. Seeing Takeo still staring in awe, Kyojuro urged him again. Gathering his focus, Takeo took a deep breath, then reached out and wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The process might have been a little unconventional, but at last, he had obtained a blade capable of killing demons, a Nichiren sword. For the next 2 weeks, no, for a long time to come, this sword would be his most treasured possession. Thank you, Kyojuro-san. I'll take good care of it. Takeo bowed his head and earnestly expressed his gratitude. Kyojuro had to leave in a hurry. After handing over the Nichiren sword, he and Mitsurai departed under cover of night. As for Takeo, the next morning, carrying food and supplies packed for him by Senjuro, he set out on his journey toward Mount Fujikazan. Anyone who wished to become a member of the Demon Slayer Corps, regardless of who they were, had to first pass the final selection. The location for the final selection was a place known as Mount Fujikazan, where wisteria flowers, a natural repellent to demons, bloomed year-round. The Corps would send captured demons there, using them to test the worthiness of potential recruits. To pass the test, candidates had to survive on the mountain for 7 days. Only then would they earn the right to become official members of the Demon Slayer Corps. Because of that, food and water were essential. At minimum, one needed enough supplies to last 5 days. Senjuro seemed very familiar with the whole process. He efficiently prepared dry rations for Takeo and explained that Mount Fujikazan had natural water sources, so there was no need to worry about drinking water. Though Senjuro had no intention of becoming a demon slayer himself, he knew a surprising amount about the Corps. But then again, it made perfect sense. His father was a former Flame Hashura, his brother was the current Flame Hashura, and even his brother's former Tsugyuko had become the Love Hashura. In total, Senjuro personally knew 3 Hashura. It was no wonder he was so well informed. Mount Fujikazan was located quite far from Tokyo. And in this era where there were few vehicles and trains only ran between major cities, 2 weeks wasn't a lot of time. From the looks of it, Takeo would have to travel through the night just to make it on time. Fortunately, nearly 2 months had passed since his arrival in this world. The weather was gradually warming as spring approached, and thanks to his strong regenerative ability, Takeo didn't have to worry about freezing to death during overnight travel. Otherwise, he never would have dared to travel by night in the cold. Good. At this pace, I should arrive at Mount Fujikazan 3 days early. 1 week later, while traveling at night, Takeo estimated the remaining distance and finally let out a small breath of relief. Thanks to his extraordinary stamina and regeneration, he had been able to travel through the night without sleep. Otherwise, the full 2 weeks would have only just barely gotten him to Mount Fujikazan in time, probably with no rest before the trial began. But now, he had an extra 3 days to spare. Since time was no longer pressing, Takeo eased up a bit. With the sun having already set and no signs of nearby settlements, he decided to find a place to rest for the night and recover his energy. He also wanted to spend some time thinking about how to develop his own original breathing technique. Having already grasped both wind breathing and flame breathing was proof that he had talent, so maybe he really could develop a unique breathing style suited to him. The problem was, he had no clue where to even begin. Or rather, he didn't know what kind of breathing technique he should try to create. Flame breathing was one of the 5 foundational styles, so putting that aside, love breathing, which derived from flame breathing, clearly reflected Kenroji Mitsurai's personality and character. So what about Takeo? What kind of breathing technique would suit his personality and physical traits? These were questions that would take a long time to fully explore. So whenever he had free time, Takeo would ponder them. It had become a way to pass the time during travel. Searching for a place to rest, combined with thinking about how to create a new breathing style, ended up taking more time than expected. By the time the moon had climbed high and the sky was completely engulfed in night, Takeo finally realized he still hadn't found a place to sleep. Looks like I'll be camping outdoors again. Glancing around at the surrounding forest, Takeo scratched his head with a sigh. Just as he was about to find a random tree to sleep in, a sharp, piercing cry of a baby rang through the stillness of the night. Wah! The cry immediately made Takeo abandon the idea of resting in a tree. He turned toward the direction of the sound, his brows furrowing slightly, and sprinted toward where the crying was coming from. But just as he entered the forest and started making his way toward the source, a figure suddenly burst out of the underbrush and slammed into him with alarming precision. Bang! Oh wah! That hurts! Who are you? The one who collided with him let out a wail first. Takeo, who had stumbled back 2 steps from the impact, twitched at the corner of his mouth and looked at the person who'd run into him. Pretty sure I should be asking you that. Where did you even come from? Wait a second, a girl. He looked more closely at the person in the moonlight and finally saw her clearly. Though her figure was a bit slender, she still had the distinct curves of a young woman. Her medium-length black hair hung loosely over her shoulders, slightly wavy like soft ripples, without a single accessory. Her face was rather cute, though unfortunately, a scar along her chin disrupted the harmony of her features. But her eyes, those stood out most of all. A calm, watery light blue, clear and serene like a still pond. What caught Takeo's attention the most, however, was the sword at her waist. The blade looked very similar to a Nichiren sword, yet she wasn't wearing the standard Demon Slayer Corps uniform. So, was she a prospective recruit, like him? Judging by her gear and direction of travel toward Mount Fujikazan, Takeo arrived at that conclusion. Chapter 20, Come to Mommy. What the just a brat. The girl had clearly gotten a good look at Takeo now, and just like he had seen her, she saw him. And when she noticed his short stature and youthful appearance, she let out a breath and muttered something that sounded far too similar to what that drunkard Shinjiro had once said. That irritated Takeo a little. Driven by the impulsiveness that came with his younger body, the words flew out of his mouth before he could stop them. I should be the one saying that, just a little girl. What are you even doing out here? Little girl? What part of me is little? It was like he'd hit a nerve. She slapped her hand against her chest and exclaimed, I'm 15. That's marriageable age in the village, you know. I'm way older than you, you runt. Ah. I see. Nice to meet you, old lady, sorry to bump into you. You little punk. They had barely just met, and yet Takeo and the girl were already bickering. But it couldn't be helped, he had already noticed this lately. The way his mind had started syncing with his younger body, was definitely starting to influence how he acted. His mindset had started to grow younger too, otherwise, there was no way he would have lost his temper just because of a few mocking words from that drunk, Shinjiro. Compared to the scoldings he'd endured from supervisors in his previous life, Shinjiro's words were nothing more than child's play. He shouldn't have gotten angry at all. But the reality was he had gotten angry. His words had leapt out of his mouth faster than his thoughts could catch them. It had been like that then. And now, it was happening again. Wah! Thankfully, a sharp and loud baby's cry interrupted their argument. The girl who had come out of the brush instantly turned her head toward the sound, and so did Takeo. Both of them stopped quarreling and sprinted toward the direction of the crying. The girl ran ahead, with Takeo right behind her. Watching the swift agility of her movements and the way her physical ability clearly exceeded that of a normal person, Takeo became even more certain. She must be a demon slayer swordswoman trained in breathing techniques. And most likely, she was a prospective recruit, just like him. It definitely wasn't possible for her to be a Hashura. The Demon Slayer Corps only had two female Hashura. One was Kenroji Mitsurai, whom Takeo had already met, and the other was Shinobu Koko, the insect Hashura. And Shinobu's Haori was famously distinctive. There was no way this girl was either of them. Aside from the Hashura, all official members of the Demon Slayer Corps were required to wear the standard uniform. Since this girl wasn't wearing one, that could only mean she was a prospective recruit. Takeo reached that conclusion in mere seconds. And by that time, both of them had arrived at the source of the crying. A woman? What's she doing out here so late at night? Hiding behind the trees, the girl and Takeo spotted the source of the sound, a woman standing in the clearing, dressed in a dark green kimono. Her back was to them, and she cradled a swaddled baby in her arms, gently rocking it as if trying to soothe it. But it wasn't working, the baby's cries only grew louder. The girl furrowed her brows in confusion. She didn't understand why a woman would be wandering through the forest with a baby at this hour. Takeo's nose twitched. His expression turned serious. In a low, firm voice, his eyes locked onto the woman holding the child. It's a demon. A demon. Wait, how do you know what a demon is? The girl first gasped in shock, then quickly realized what Takeo had just said. He had recognized it was a demon. Takeo didn't even glance at the girl as he replied, "What's there to be surprised about? You knew what it was too, didn't you?" "Why yeah, but I'm a demon slayer swordswoman, and you have a sword too? Don't tell me." "That's exactly it. Now quit the chatter. We've got a demon to deal with." Takeo had no interest in arguing with the clueless girl beside him. His eyes were fixed solely on the demon in the green kimono before them. Demons smelled different from humans. Takeo, having fought one before, knew this all too well. There was always a faintly foul odor clinging to demons, not immediately obvious, but noticeable to him. To Takeo, it was like the stench of rot. The water demon he fought previously had the same scent, though its strength had been masked by the moisture clinging to its body. It wasn't until they fought inside a warehouse that he had truly picked up on it. And now this was no different. The first thing he smelled was the woman's heavy perfume, thick and almost overpowering. But beneath that, buried under layers of fragrance, was that familiar, unmistakable stench of a demon. That was how he had known for sure what she was. "You're right. We have to take this demon down first." The girl snapped to attention, clearly shaken but now determined. The girl quickly reacted, drawing the sword at her waist. Together with Takeo, she stepped out of the bushes and into the open. And without hesitation, she launched an attack on the demon. "Wait, hold on!" Takeo called out, trying to stop her. But it was too late. Her grasp of breathing technique wasn't bad. With her body strengthened at such close range, she practically closed the distance in an instant, bringing her blade down toward the demon woman. She didn't use a formal breathing technique form, just a straightforward, powerful slash. But given her speed and strength, any ordinary demon should have been caught off guard and decapitated on the spot. However, reality didn't play out the way she expected. Just as her blade came down, the demon woman still holding the infant suddenly turned her head sharply. And in that instant, several long, dark green cloth strands burst from the back of her kimono. The sashes wove together rapidly, forming a shield-like dome in front of her that resembled a pot lid. The girl's blade struck the cloth shield, but aside from causing a slight ripple across its surface, it had no effect at all. tch. That's tough. Her attack failed, and she immediately leapt back, retreating to Takeo's side. Takeo frowned and snapped at her, that was reckless. Don't you know how to observe your enemy first? If it's a demon, just cut it down. What's there to observe? The girl shot back without hesitation. In most cases, a demon encountered deep in the forest at night was likely to be a regular one, and against an ordinary demon, she wouldn't even need to use a breathing technique form to decapitate it. That was how it was supposed to go. But the demon woman standing before them now was clearly not ordinary. Ah, my baby. Oh no, my baby, why are you over there? The demon, who had blocked the girl's attack, didn't counterattack. The cloth sashes that had protected her moments ago were now fully retracted, blending seamlessly into her kimono, giving both Takeo and the girl a clear look at her face. She had a horn on her forehead. Her face was lined with bulging veins. Her mouth was filled with sharp, exposed fangs. And her eyes those wild, beast-like pupils. She looked exactly like a demon. From the structure of her face, she must have been a very beautiful woman before she became a demon, but now, to Takeo and the girl, all they saw was something grotesque. The demon woman still cradled the wailing infant in her arms, but she didn't even glance at the child. Instead, her gaze locked completely and intently on Takeo. That entire statement just now had been directed at Takeo. Is she your mother? The girl asked blankly, turning to look at Takeo in disbelief. A vein twitched on Takeo's forehead as he rolled his eyes at her. If you don't need your eyes, donate them to someone who does. Well, excuse me for asking. Why do you have to be so mean about it? Stupid brat. She rolled her eyes right back at him, pouting in clear annoyance. Just as the two were about to start bickering again, the demon woman interrupted. She stared at Takeo, and despite the beast-like pupils in her eyes, her gaze was full of motherly affection, as if she truly believed what she was saying. My child, come here, come to me. Let mommy see you. My sweet child. You've grown so big without me even realizing. Come, let mommy take a look at you. The moment she finished speaking, the cloth sashes around her body shot out like serpents, lunging straight toward Takeo.
Thanks for listening.